From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, the former Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips has told LBC she's glad the government's announced an ultimatum to tech companies about children's ability to share naked images. The Prime Minister says if the firms don't act within 3 months, then new laws could hold them criminally liable for safeguarding breaches. Ms Phillips says a solution is perfectly possible.
Nudity filters already exist on all of our phones, so this is not a new thing. What is new about what we're asking them to do is to make them default, not that children get to say yes or no, or parents have to log in on every single different app. What we're saying is that they have to be, by default, blocking from children from being able to take these images. It is completely technologically possible because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Civil liberties groups have expressed concerns that scanning images for nudity could threaten everyone's anonymity and privacy. Android owner Google says it's working constructively to find effective, privacy-preserving solutions. The families of the 3 people stabbed to death in Nottingham say every single institution failed them. They were speaking at the public inquiry into the deaths of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates in 2023. Iran's military says it's halting operations against Israel after a major test of the April ceasefire overnight. Israel has also reportedly agreed to stop striking Iranian infrastructure on the orders of the US president. Former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Brennan, has told LBC it's not just political pressure on Donald Trump now.
I think more fundamentally is the continued high price of oil and what it's meaning as far as at the gas pump is concerned, particularly during the summer months when a lot of Americans are traveling on their vacations and the price of oil has gone sky high. This is something that I think is putting pressure on Donald Trump and even his advisors at the White House.
15 fire engines and around 100 firefighters are tackling a fire at a recycling centre in southeast London. The dark plume of smoke from the fire near Millwall's football ground in Bermondsey can be seen from the centre of the capital. Rail services in and out of London Bridge are expected to be disrupted for the next couple of hours. Ukraine's president has met the king at Windsor Castle. Volodymyr Zelensky held talks with Sir Keir Starmer at Downing Street yesterday. The EU has voted to give Kyiv nearly €3 billion more towards its conflict with Russia. Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, the Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College London, told Andrew Marr Ukraine is having some success in reclaiming territory and striking deep inside Russia.
Crimea is now virtually completely cut off. There's petrol rationing, there's rush on the supermarkets and all the things that indicate a place in difficulty. And it's not just Crimea. The city of Donetsk, which is in sort of the heart of the Russian-occupied territory, is facing similar problems as well.
Christian Eriksen is back home after collapsing on the pitch during Denmark's friendly with Ukraine last night. The midfielder suffered a cardiac arrest during a Euros match in 2021. He then had an implantable cardioverter defibrillator device fitted. Professor Brian Williams from the British Heart Foundation has told LBC the device might well have saved his life.
For people who have a predisposition to have these sudden potentially fatal arrhythmias, they sit there, they monitor the heart rhythm, and then if it detects anything abnormal, firstly it can send some pulses, electrical pulses into the heart muscle to try and stabilise it and push it back into a normal rhythm. But if that doesn't work and the rhythm is totally chaotic, it will fire a shock.
And the first day of the tennis tournament at the Queen's Club has been affected by the rain. Britain's Katie Boulter was due to be on court in West London today, while Serena Williams will make her comeback in the doubles tomorrow. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 5 points at 10,373. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.16. LBC weather mostly dry this evening across England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight. Lows of 4 to 8 degrees. Sunshine and showers tomorrow. Highs of 15 to 19. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Matt Hewitt.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It's 4 minutes past 7 on LBC. Welcome to the show. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. Let me just remind you that you can watch the show now, all 3 hours of it, on the LBC app, Global Player, or the LBC YouTube channel. Now, it's a long time, well, it seems a long time since we've talked about what's happening in Iran and Israel, so we're going to correct that tonight. But I want to put a different question to you, not on the military action that seems to have sprung up again over the last 48 hours, but how it's affecting this country, how it's affecting our economy, and how it's affecting you, frankly. So if you've got a view on this, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Are you noticing that the cost of living, I mean, bear in mind that this military action has been going on now since right at the end of February. The Americans don't seem to be involved anymore, but it's still going on between Iran and Israel. And that means that there are consequences for the Strait of Hormuz, for example. And there are consequences, I think, for our wider economy. Are you noticing that inflation is picking up, that things in the supermarkets are getting that bit more expensive than they were at the beginning of this? How is this crisis affecting you? Well, before we go on to the economics, let's hear a word from the Prime Minister, because he was asked by reporters for his thoughts on the fighting having broken out between Israel and Iran again last night. And this is what the Prime Minister had to say.
I'm deeply concerned about the resumption of violence. It is really important that all parties get back to a ceasefire. There are serious negotiations going on towards a lasting peace. It's really important that we give them every chance of success, because this conflict is already having a huge impact across the world, including here in the United Kingdom. So I say to all parties, we all have a responsibility to get back to that ceasefire, and it's really important that we're very clear about that.
Well, the fighting does seem to have flared down again, having flared up. I'm not sure how long that's going to last, because I think the Iranians were saying initially that this was going to be a week-long initiative with lots of strikes on Israel. It's also caused, I think it's fair to say, a bit of conflict between Israel and the United States. Donald Trump, none too pleased with the Israeli Prime Minister. But let's talk to Dr. Arash Azizi, Iranian-American historian who's a lecturer at Yale University and the author of the books The Shadow Commander, Soleimani, the US and Iran's Global Ambitions, and What Iranians Want, Women, Life, Freedom. Well, that's an interesting title. Dr. Azizi, thank you very much for talking to us on LBC again. Can you bring us up to date with the latest state of play? What is actually happening, or perhaps more importantly, not happening?
It's great to be with you. What's happening is basically that Iran attacked Israel, Israel attacked Iran back, but Iran doesn't want to return to the full war. So they've both called it quits at this stage, basically. They've both showed that attacks on each other will have consequences, and Iran has stopped. And they very much want these negotiations with the US over some sort of an interim deal to succeed. So I think they'll continue trying to get that deal. They want a deal that would release their frozen assets, the Iranian frozen assets, give some sort of a recognition over the Hormuz Strait, show that they're a regional power, and perhaps lead to broader negotiations. Although for now they really are kicking that can down the road and just want a sort of an end to the war that gets them also some of their frozen cash.
What role has President Trump played in the fact that these hostilities seem to have stopped for now?
He played an important role. After Iranians attacked, he could have, for example, just be very angry at Iran and encourage Israel to attack. He did the opposite. He publicly asked Israel not to attack, which of course they did, but nevertheless he showed that he wanted a deal, not a broadening of the war. And from what I understand from my sources, his emissaries also secretly sort of told Iranians that they were very much interested in a deal, that Iran shouldn't be foolish and bring back the whole war because of this, and that they could still get a deal. So, he, at this stage, you could say he prevented the war from becoming broader.
What do we know of the truth of this story, that he had an absolute tirade against Benjamin Netanyahu and said the whole world hates you, you're the problem, blah, blah, blah? Because I think that was a single source story, and a lot of people are pouring scorn on that.
I'm now writing a chapter in my book about the Yom Kippur War, like 60 years later, and it's still some of the things that happened are not clear. So, it always takes time for the really truth of these stories to become clear. But I think it's clear that Trump does not want to return to the full war. He wants to get rid of this. He hates things that are long and not successful. He wants some shiny victory, or at least sort of a get-out situation. So it's true that he probably yells at Netanyahu from time to time. telling him that his actions, Netanyahu has his own calculations, his own election at home, a very different sort of. Also, he doesn't care about the global economy as much, right? Because Israel is a small country, it has very different sort of calculus. United States has to worry about inflation at home. I can tell you, here in this country, at some point, you can see it in our retirement accounts, in a sort of a stock market, and at the gas price at the gas station. So Trump wants an end to this, and so it's entirely imaginable to see that he sometimes yells at Netanyahu and wants to contain him.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Dr. Arash Azizi, a lecturer at Yale University. Joining me in the studio live is Ed Conway, economics editor at Sky News. He's the author of the upcoming book, Trade World, a transporting story of many moving parts. When's that coming out then?
September.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, let's talk about how all this is affecting the UK economy. Because inevitably, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, that will have an effect on oil prices, which have been relatively stable over the past couple of weeks, but are showing signs of going up again.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I find it all quite surreal, because we were told not that long ago by various people like the International Energy Agency that, for instance, this is the biggest supply shock that we've ever had in the energy market, that the impact could be cataclysmic, that Europe only has 6 weeks worth of jet fuel left. And here we are kind of much longer than that along. And none of those kind of apocalyptic things look to have happened. The oil price, we're more than 100 days in. The oil price is below $100 a barrel, which is kind of, that point at which people get really kind of worried. And what I think a lot of people are trying to do is to work out, okay, is this just the calm before the storm? Or was it not as much of a big deal as expected? And at the same time, you've got the market, maybe not going quite gangbusters, but share prices have been pretty buoyant, and mostly it's an AI story there. But for me, I've taken a step. I've been in the middle of writing that book that you mentioned and putting together a podcast for Sky, and I'm surprised at the extent to which this hasn't been as much of a story. And I'm surprised at the extent to which oil prices have stayed quite low.
Because you just reminded me of something. I can remember in the, end of March, beginning of April, a succession of cabinet ministers sort of fanned out across the media and basically said, no, you don't need to worry about sort of saving up. You just keep buying fuel as you would. And yet other countries, particularly in Asia, were doing the exact opposite. And I remember thinking, is this going to come back to haunt them? Well, it hasn't, has it? It
hasn't yet. And, and actually diesel price is still really high. It's mostly diesel that's affected, because actually that's the thing we need to import more of. But they've actually started to come down recently. But I think the thing I was looking at the kind of supply and demand balances, because basically the story is exactly the same as it was back at towards the end of February, start of March, which is that we depend on oil coming out of the Strait of Hormuz for about 20% of all of the global oil. That's like a massive slug, and we have never lost that much in one go before. What's happened in the intervening period, and this is why I think oil prices are still relatively low, is, for one thing, a lot of countries have just taken their big stockpiles of oil and said, OK, we're going to release a large amount of it. Secondly, China's not consuming as much oil as it used to, because it has these big stockpiles as well. And then on top of that, there is a bit of oil kind of going through. Some tankers are getting through the Strait of Hormuz. And you put all of that together, and you don't quite make up that gap, but you get kind of quite a long way towards making up that gap. And then the bit that's left is basically countries around the world. And it's not really us. It's mostly countries in Asia, places like Pakistan, like Sri Lanka, have had to cut back on the amount of oil that they're using. And it's tough. It is grisly in many of these countries. We're kind of comparatively okay because we can pay more for jet fuel. I'm not saying this is we as a country versus them. It's still expensive. It's expensive filling up your tank. But we're a richer nation, so we can afford it. The worry, Ian, is that that is a temporary thing. So the stockpile releases, that's temporary. China not wanting to import as much as it previously had done, that's temporary. So we've still got this kind of ticking clock thing. Whereas if this doesn't get resolved, and if we can't get tankers through the Strait of Hormuz by later on this year, then I think a lot of those nerve-wracking, quite scary things do actually take effect.
Apart from diesel costs and petrol costs, how is the UK consumer being affected by this at the moment, and how do you see that panning out in the future?
Well, at the moment, it is mostly those energy costs. So it's energy costs which gradually kind of go into, because we know the way that the price cap works. It gradually feeds in, and we're starting, to see that, and we will from July. It's petrol costs being higher. You can see that in inflation. It's the fact the Bank of England is looking at all of this, and whereas not long ago it was saying, OK, we're ready to cut interest rates, now it's saying they're on hold and maybe they might rise.
But the government hasn't really, well, if they have thought about it, they haven't implemented it. They haven't done what Liz Truss did when she was Prime Minister and introduced a massive rescue package for the consumer.
No, but the shock, like I say, that there's this kind of weird kind of suspended animation. The shock hasn't been as immediate and as great as it was, at the time of Russia invading Ukraine, partly because that was all about gas. This is mostly about oil, so it goes into your kind of petrol bill more than it goes into your gas bill. But as I say, we're kind of in this strange unreality. And the question is, are we like Roadrunner? We're kind of over the edge of the cliff and our kind of legs are still going. And if the ships don't start passing through the strait, then we genuinely could have that kind of economic plunge.
And very quickly, because I know you have to go, but business confidence, there's a survey out today showing that it's absolutely plummeted. If it was announced tomorrow that there was a long-term peace deal, would that confidence automatically come back quickly?
I think it would, because that's one of the many shocks facing the world right now. But that being said, the UK, we've got all sorts of challenges right now. The welfare state, that report recently about people who are not in education. There's loads of and the fact that we have one of the highest rates of taxation that we've had in a long time. There's all sorts of kind of long-standing issues that we need to kind of grapple with. That even if everything goes perfectly in the Strait of Hormuz, that whoever's prime minister in X months' time will have to deal with. And none of that stuff is easy, but having an energy price shock on top of that is disastrous for the UK, because we're a massive importer of this stuff. So we do need to hope it comes to an end soon, and that they put Pandora back in the box. But my worry is, like, having shown the Iranians, and it's interesting listening to your last call, having shown the Iranians that they have this power to take this choke point for the global economy and squeeze their hands around it, and the amount of impact that has. Can you put that back into the box, or do you basically make the world more dangerous for a long time?
I have to let you get back to writing your book and you're doing your podcast. Ed Conway, thank you very much indeed. 17 minutes past 7.
This is LBC.
Get iPhone 17 in the Vodafone
help out in some way, because other countries have done that. Australia cut its fuel duty, I think, by half or quite by something quite dramatic. Some European countries have done that as well, and yet our government has done absolutely nothing. Now, I don't say that as criticism, because I think there are times when actually, if the government does do something, it's only probably a fairly minor thing. So there were calls for the government to reverse the 5p fuel duty cut from September, which they have done. But I mean, 5p on a litre of petrol that costs £1.89, not going to make a massive amount of difference, is it? So do you think that the government should have done more to introduce some sort of rescue package? Or do you think if they had done, the law of unintended consequence could have come in? Because when Liz Truss spent all that money on the energy price cap, I mean, it was tens of billions of pounds, wasn't it? If not hundreds of billions. And when Rishi Sunak did the same in COVID, I mean, that's had a long-term effect on our debt. I mean, we're now close on £3 trillion in debt. Well, I would not argue now that the government should spend another 50 billion or 100 billion to rescue consumers, because I think that would be grossly irresponsible. Love to hear your views on that as well. Rupert Harrison is a senior advisor to the investment management company PIMCO and was previously the chief of staff of George Osborne while he was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Rupert, very good evening. Of course, when George was Chancellor and you were advising him, that was the aftermath of the financial crash. which I think sort of hovered like a shadow over the whole economy for many, many years, still does maybe to an extent. But you didn't have one of these sort of major events where you had to decide, well, do we intervene here or don't we? Or at least if you did, I can't remember that. Do you think that the government has been right to withstand political pressure to introduce some sort of consumer rescue package?
So I think your framing was, I think you're right. I think there are two reasons why they are right to withstand pressure for a kind of big package. The first, which you alluded to with the Liz Truss experience, is that you would probably get a market reaction. So the UK has now a relatively high debt to GDP country. The market is nervous about the future direction of fiscal policy, which is the amount the government is borrowing in the UK. And I think that given these constraints, if the government were to signal that we're going to, throw caution to the wind and borrow billions and billions more to offset the impact of this shock, then we could all end up paying for that through higher interest rates on mortgages and throughout the economy. And so I think that's one of the major reasons why the government hasn't done that. And actually, you mentioned Australia. I mean, maybe that's the exception. I'm not actually aware of exactly what they've done on fuel duty, but when we look around the world, most countries at this stage are actually still playing it very cautiously. They are still waiting to see what happens. They are doing kind of small measures around the edges to support certain groups. But we don't see countries doing what a lot of countries did in 2022. And I think that's because partly the uncertainty that Ed Conway was talking about earlier, where we still don't know how big a crisis this is going to be. And it's also just because we're now in this environment that's very different from before, where markets are nervous, interest rates are higher. And in a sense, you don't want the government to put its foot on the accelerator by injecting more money into the economy to help people out, only for markets and the central banks to put their foot on the brake in response, because they're worried about inflation. And in the end, all you get is a mess. You don't go any faster.
But business is already putting on the brake, isn't it? Because, I mean, I've just got anecdotal evidence, and possibly you can corroborate this or maybe not, that there are plenty of large companies out there with cash to invest in the British economy, but they're withholding it at the moment for all sorts of different reasons. Business confidence is one. They don't see the UK economy as one which is going to recover very quickly from the events of the last few years, and particularly because of our debt levels.
Well, I think there's two parts to that. So we've seen business confidence and actually consumer confidence around the world take a hit in response to the Iran crisis, and that is quite legitimate. You get a huge increase in uncertainty. You don't know what the inflation rate, the prices, or the interest rates you're going to be facing in a few months are going to be. And then coming in the UK, that was coming on top of a business sector that, the data showed had already taken quite a big hit to its confidence over the previous kind of year to 18 months because of uncertainty about tax rises, then those tax rises being announced, and then the impact, particularly of the employer national insurance rise, feeding its way through the labour market. So, the UK, you talked about the sort of shocks that the economies get hit by. We seem to have had a series of shocks now. Businesses haven't quite had a period of calm to sort of, recover and kind of press go on a lot of investment plans. I mean, to your point earlier, I do think if you did get a resolution of the Iran crisis, I think is a very open question about how lasting any resolution can be. But if you did get a really great upside surprise and the uncertainty was reduced significantly, I think you would see that sentiment improve quite quickly, because I think you would see people think, okay, inflation's going to come down. I don't need to worry about the central bank hiking interest rates. I can get on with my plan. So I still think there is scope for this to improve quickly, but it does rely, all of us are depend enormously on what happens in Iran and in the region over the next few weeks.
Is there any reason for my listeners to feel confident about the future this year, their own economic future? The fact that, I think most people are predicting that inflation is going to go up, but maybe it'll go up less than a lot of the predictions are. What's the light at the end of the tunnel, if there is any?
Yeah, so first, I think the first point is that the tunnel is likely to be a lot smaller and less dark than the tunnel from sort of 2022 through to 2024, right? That was a much, much bigger shock to inflation. It was a much more difficult environment to get inflation back down. We think we're going to see inflation, based on current oil prices and what markets expect, inflation fell to 2.8%, it might rise to 3.5%. That is a long, long way from the sort of depths of that Ukraine crisis, the post-COVID inflation, right? And it's within the bounds of previous experiences of high inflation that we've had. So don't assume that, oh God, here we go again. Secondly, there are reasons for optimism that, the central bank, the Bank of England, if inflation does start to come back down, does have scope to cut rates further. Rates are still quite high in the UK relative to, for example, in the Eurozone next door. So there's scope for interest rates to come down. And then there is scope, medium term, that most, as well as worrying about inflation, financial markets are obsessed with artificial intelligence and potential increases in investment and productivity. And that is the kind of nuts and bolts of how you can get growth back into the Western, developed economies. If you can get new technology, productivity growth, and wages growing again, there's no reason why, we've had a series of pretty negative shocks. Maybe we're due a positive one.
Well, I always like to end an interview on a positive note, Rupert. Thank you very much indeed. That's Rupert Harrison there, Senior Advisor to the investment management company PIMCO. Right, let's go to your calls. Billy is in Swansea. Hello, Billy.
Hello.
Swindon.
Yeah.
I saw the SW and I thought Swansea.
No worries. How are you doing, Ian?
I'm doing terribly well, thank you. What would you like to say?
I'll make my point in a second, but first I wanted to say how brilliantly you do this show from 7 until 10. I'm a regular listener, and I'd like to say you're brilliant. I love listening to this show, and always do. So it's a pleasure.
Well, I take the compliment. Thank you very much, Billy.
No worries at all. So I'd like to speak about, from a perspective of my own, how frustrating, I guess, this is for people living in the country who have no say whatsoever on the war going on overseas. So if you look at British people obviously living their life, going to work, coming home, getting a paycheck, and all these wars happen overseas between the leaders of the countries that are trying to fight on the basis that the strikes are happening. And obviously if someone attacks a country, the country has to respond. But I feel there is a sense of frustration among the public that these wars they have no control of, and the average person is struggling as it is to go to work, to get a paycheck, to go to the shops and do the average shop. The average shop now, if you look at it, for some families is rising above £100 a month. It's expensive. I just think there is a frustration that people don't have a say in these foreign events.
How different do you think that is to 100 years ago?
I think a long time ago, people may have had more people. That's a good question. That's a really good question.
That's what I'm paid to do, Billy.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
I mean, my point by saying that is that I think that because in the modern world, we have access to international media, we have access to our national media, we know an awful lot more about what's going on in the world and the motivations of the people who are behind what's going on. And therefore, I think we can question it more than maybe we would have done.
Yeah.
But I suspect that if we were having the conversation in the mid-1930s with all the German arms build-up leading up to 1939, I think a lot of people then would have felt powerless, that things were out of their control.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think back then, about 100 years ago, there would have been less questioning, and they would be less informed. They would be less informed in the world events. But I kind of can only feel for people right now who are struggling, and then they hear on the news that there's been a strike in a war, and then their bills go up more and more, and they continue to struggle, and it strains them more. But I think that this has been going on between Iran and Israel for a long, long time. And I think it's going to be, as much as Trump is trying to tell them to stop fighting, I really think this is just going to go on and off. You'll find ceasefires come and go, I think. And I'm not sure how they're going to reach a conclusion here, Ian. I'm not sure.
No, well, I'm not either. And it is slightly ironic that Donald Trump says stop fighting when Actually, it was him that started it on February the 28th, or at least the bombing campaign. Billy, thank you very much indeed for giving us a call. 0345 6060 973. How is this war affecting your own pocket? And do you remain, after listening to what Rupert Harrison said there, do you have any sense of optimism that, well, actually, inflation, we were talking about 6, 8, 9% not long ago. Now he's talking about, well, maybe 3.5%. Well, that is a bit higher than it has been over the last few months, but it's certainly not at danger levels, is it? 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 7:31. News headlines with Matt Hewitt.
Sir Keir Starmer's told tech bosses that standing by is not an option when it comes to the safety of children online. The government's announced a 3-month ultimatum to tech companies to prevent children being able to take or receive explicit images or be held criminally liable for safeguarding breaches. Israel says its war with Iran and Hezbollah is not over and has warned people in southern Lebanon to evacuate. The comments come after the ceasefire was tested to its limits overnight, with both Iran and Israel firing missiles at each other. And 15 fire engines and around 100 firefighters are tackling a fire at a recycling centre beside the railway line into London Bridge Station. People in Bermondsey are being told to keep their doors and windows closed due to the significant amount of smoke. LBC weather, mostly dry this evening for England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight. Lows of 8 to 11 degrees.
This is LBC.
A message from TfL.
I saw a leaf.
I don't really know, to be honest. I'm very nervous. I've not done this before.
Don't be nervous at all. What's the point that you'd like to make?
I would just like to think, at what point, are we going to kind of take stuff in our own hands and sort of come together and help each other out? I feel like there's so much that we're fighting against, economically and almost morally as well, everywhere. There's a lot of division, and I just feel like, when are we going to come together and start helping each other out on a personal basis? Because I don't really feel like it's going to get better from a governmental standpoint. There's just so much they have to deal with.
What do you mean? What could we all do that would have an impact?
Well, this is what I think needs to be debated, really. I'm not terribly well educated on economics and politics, but I feel like there's maybe an angle of a slightly more human level that we could bring into it. Maybe more food banks or more charity, or there's so many options we have that I don't feel like are necessarily being explored.
So maybe effectively you mean that we should all look out for each other a little bit more? Yeah,
maybe just bring that into the point of conversation on a national level.
I think you're right in that second regard, because I think the level of debate that we have on a national level now, particularly among different political parties, is so aggressive, it's so divisive. And I mean, I'm somebody who likes to think generally that politics is a worthwhile calling, that most politicians are in it for the right reasons. But when you see some of the shenanigans that are going on at the moment between different politicians, I mean, particularly last week over the murder of Henry Novak, some of the things that were said then, I mean, are literally unforgivable. And you think most of the people that are making these comments on a basic human level are not nasty people. And yet politics does something to them where they feel that it's okay to essentially traduce one of their opponents for no reason at all.
But you put that very nicely, I think.
God, the compliments are showering in today.
Well, yeah, I think it's very divisive, I think the word is, and that is having, ripples on everything, from cost of living to even social politics and social behaviours on a national scale. And for me, the cost of living has been tremendous. I'm on a joint income with my partner. We're working very hard to keep everything ticking over, but we're not realistically able to look ahead of another month. We're living month to month, which is kind of the norm, I think, for a lot of people. But when does my life start? I'm a young lad. I've got ambitions. I've got things that I really want to achieve, but they're not looking terribly realistic. I'm working very hard. I'm trying my best, but it always just seems like there's a carrot dangling in front of me that I can't quite reach out to yet.
Well, and therefore, I think it is incumbent on people who hold some power or influence over your life to give you a bit of a hand if they can, and not maybe, I don't know if you own a house or if you rent somewhere, but if you're a landlord, don't automatically put the rent up by another £100 or £200 a month. Just have some sort of knowledge of what your tenants are going through and what you can do to help them through what is inevitably a difficult period. I have a house which I rent out to a friend, and I haven't put the rent up in 4 years because I know that if I do, she's not going to, well, I won't say she necessarily couldn't afford it, but it's going to make her life more difficult. I value her as a tenant, and I don't want to make someone's life more difficult. Now, that's not me being a charity. It's making a sort of a logical decision with a bit of a human touch to it.
Yeah, too right. I don't know a huge amount about my landlord, but she's a lovely human being. I've met her twice now, and I think she'll look after us. And I think that's very refreshing to have. I've only lived, outside of my parents' house for about a year now. Not quite a year, and it has been difficult. Yeah, I've had a lot of support, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And I'm not unhappy. I'm very content with the life I live. I've made things in my power as nice as they can be, but I just feel like there's so much out of my control that I'm just sort of sat watching my life go by without really steering the ship in a sense. And I don't quite know how to get out of that. And I definitely think the state of the world right now is crazy. I don't know. I've not lived 100 years. I'm sure it's been difficult for a long time now. But
well, let me tell you, I've lived 63 years, and it's crazier than I've ever experienced it. So your instincts are absolutely bang on.
Do you think that could be just down to a level of personal awareness? I feel like information travels so much. There's a lot more information out there. Maybe it feels a lot worse than it actually is. It could be. It's a very multifaceted issue, I think.
I think it's easy to talk ourselves into a sort of spiral of doom and gloom, and that's why. I try as much as I can, but obviously the news agenda is pretty depressing at the best of times, but I try as much as I can to at least introduce a modicum of optimism and positivity, because no one wants to just listen to 24 hours a day of gloom and doom, but it's very easy to do that when you look at the news agenda. Francis, I don't know why you were nervous about this call, because Alison has texted in to say, Francis is talking so much sense. What a lovely person. We do need to help and be better to each other.
Do you know what? That if anyone takes a message from anything that they hear today, I think it is just to look at life on a more human level. And it's not just us over here having a hard time. It's global, and no matter who you are or where you live, I think we're all together facing some very difficult times, and I think that needs to be remembered.
And sometimes we just all need to have a group hug, don't we?
100%.
Look forward to your second time call, Francis. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we'll come back to this in a moment, but first let me tell you that the families of the victims of the Nottingham attack 3 years ago have today accused a number of public bodies of failing the 3 people who lost their lives that day. Our reporter who was at the bereaved relatives press conference joins me now. Luke Shanahan is LBC's Midlands reporter. Luke, just remind us what happened 3 years ago and then take us through what's happened today.
Well, Iain, of course, it's a moment that's so fresh in the minds of the families who spoke today, and of the people of Nottingham, actually. But on that day, the 13th of June 2023, a man called Valdo Calacane frankly went on a rampage, Iain. He stabbed Barney Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates, and then he used Ian's van to ram into 3 other people, Wayne Burkett, Sharon Miller and Marcin Gawronski, leaving them with life-changing injuries. Now, after 14 weeks of evidence and 164 witnesses, the inquiry into all the failings around that attack heard its last oral evidence on Friday. But what next for the families of Calacane's victims? That was the question at today's press conference, and it's the one I put to Barney's parents, Emma and David Webber, afterwards.
It's accountability, addressing the miscarriage of justice, and then recognising the reform that's needed in this country to change, because lessons have not been learned, and we ban that phrase, don't we?
I just don't want to hear it, because the phrase is a phrase that makes me feel quite sick when I hear it. I used to before, and it's a phrase that I've never liked, and now I really hate it. It's just stop saying it. You don't learn lessons, so let's move away from that. We need to find a solution.
The scope of the inquiry was huge. It covered Valdo Calacane's extensive mental health history, his many encounters with police, and all the other failings which led to the 13th of June 2023. As Emma says, Barney, Grace and Ian's families always questioned what they called a miscarriage of justice, why Calacane's pleas of diminished responsibility manslaughter were accepted for the 3 deaths he caused, and why he was given a hospital order in January 2024. They say the evidence we've heard in this inquiry shows there should have been more scrutiny, especially around the evidence on Calacane's dealings with police, mental health services, over the 2.5 years leading up to his attacks. In that time, he was arrested over multiple assaults, including one against 2 colleagues just weeks before the attacks, but he wasn't arrested for that one. He was sectioned 4 times for his paranoid schizophrenia, each one after a violent assault, and yet mental health services discharged him 5 times in those 2.5 years. And we heard in the inquiry that the risk assessment before, especially the last of those discharges, didn't include details like the outstanding warrant for Calacane's arrest after he missed a court hearing for assaulting a police officer, and also the fact that a psychiatrist had actually warned Calacane could, I quote, end up killing someone. That, of course, came true 3 times over, for which Calacane was given that indefinite hospital order. The inquiry will hear some final submissions in September, and then we will get to hear its recommendations as to what to change, what changes to the law, what new guidelines it should bring in next May. But the families have said they don't want to wait until then to ask for change, to ask for accountability. And every time I speak to any of the families, Iain, they say the same thing. They will not stop until they get justice for their loved ones, and they can be sure they've done all they can to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else's family.
You do have to question why it should take till next May to decide which of the recommendations to implement. But Luke, thank you very much indeed. That's Luke Shanahan there, LBC's Midlands reporter. Let me tell you who's on Cross Question at 8. We have the Labour MP for Chesterfield, Toby Perkins, Baroness Claire Fox, a non-affiliated peer, Duncan Welder, an economist and former economic policy advisor to the Labour Party. He's got a new book out. And Emma Best, Deputy Leader of the Conservatives in the London Assembly. So they'll be here to answer your questions from 0345 6060 973. You're listening to LBC. I'm Iain Dale. It's 7:45.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
If it comes to children's safety online, as the Prime Minister marched us up to the top of the hill and marched us down again, when it comes to the safety of our children, standing by is not an option. Skills and Equalities Minister and Labour peer Jackie, now Baroness Smith.
We've been looking internationally, the experience in Australia, for example. We've been talking to those organisations who don't think a sort of blanket ban is the right way to go forward.
Andy Burrows is Chief Executive of the Molly Rose Foundation.
What parents have said all the way along is that they want to see decisive action that will work.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Noticed a change in your hearing? We'll get
have to introduce all sorts of computer systems. You could argue, well, let's cut the rate of VAT on fuel for the duration of this crisis, I suppose, but I'm not sure that's a practical suggestion. Tony's in Birmingham. Hi, Tony.
Hello, Ian. You all right?
Yep. What would you like to say?
Just like to say, yeah, I'm definitely feeling it every week when I go to fill up my car. It was just under £60 a couple of months ago. A few days ago, it was just under 80 for a Ford Focus. It's just insane. I work in the engineering and construction trade. Recently, I noticed something very, very strange. There are no cranes around the centre of Birmingham.
Well, that's unusual.
I've never ever seen that before.
No.
I don't know if you know Birmingham, Ian, but sort of on the outer districts like Digbeth and that, there's some cranes there, still stuff that was going on from before, but nothing's been built, nothing's been invested in, and it's the strangest sight I've ever seen, a city centre that doesn't have building sites because it's a nightmare for it normally. It's just emblematic of just a complete collapse of investment, it seems. I work self-employed. The work just isn't coming in anymore. I've managed to just about get by, but you have to work hard to find work these days. You don't get the phone calls like you normally would or like you used to do. And I can't see it changing until we have someone with common sense and humanity back in the White House. That's the end of it.
We've got 3 years to wait for that, and there's no guarantee that the successor will be any different, I suppose.
There's a worrying thing,
Have you seen the report out today that shows that if you drive a petrol or diesel car, you're now spending twice as much on the running costs of that car than if you had an electric car?
Well,
because
okay.
I think that is going to have quite
shocking.
a substantial effect on people's attitude to electric vehicles, because I think even the skeptics have got to see now that it is actually worth doing.
Yeah, it's. The Chinese thing, we grabbed the bull by the horns with this. They've put so much into electric cars. They're leading the way, and it seems it's a no-brainer. I was actually looking at a little documentary short today about the JQ, and it barely uses any petrol. It's something like about 500 miles to the gallon, and it's just rarely uses petrol. It's just almost entirely electric, and this is the advances that the Chinese have made. It's common sense that we revert to electric cars now. It's just ridiculous, people clinging to the idea of petrol, coal, fossil fuels.
Well, it's also interesting. I subscribe to What Car magazine because I'm a bit of a car nut, and they had an advert in for, I think, the new Renault Twingo. I mean, it's a very small car, but that's going to retail at £17,000. And I think, again, if you're in that area of the market, you're going to think, well, actually, I mean, it's now competitive, because it was the case not long ago where if you bought an electric version of a petrol car, you'd be paying a good sort of £5,000 or £10,000 more. Not the case any longer.
Yeah. But it's mad how the market is changing, isn't it? And I think the Chinese are definitely pushing that as well with some of their new cars.
I don't wish to give a free advert to What Car again, but you flick through the latest issue of that magazine, and virtually, I would say, 50-60% of all of the new models that are shown, they're all Chinese electric cars, and they all look fantastic.
It's crazy. They do. It's scary times for the British motor industry, or for any motor manufacturer. But did you hear that was it Nissan in Sunderland, and now done a deal with, I think it's Chery or BYD maybe. They're actually going to start building, I think it's BYDs at Sunderland, because they're on the capacity building their own cars. So now they're getting work building cars for the Chinese.
Who'd have thought a Japanese company making Chinese cars in Sunderland?
kind of just desserts, really, isn't it? But,
well, if it provides jobs, why not? I mean, this is where I think.
I
mean, we've been done really, really well in the tech sector, in fintech, in AI in this country. I mean, we are only just behind the Americans and Chinese in all of that. But and we've had actually quite a successful car industry, but it's car assembling rather than car manufacturing, isn't it? And you think, well, was there no one in this country that saw the electric vehicle revolution coming?
Well, I think
clearly not.
I think that's the standard British behaviour for the last 50 or 60 years, really. We don't look at trends in manufacturing and technology. We rarely do. There's a lot of short-sightedness in UK industry, UK business. We're just rubbish at it, and we have been since before I was even born, and I'm in my 50s. It's always about the bottom line. It's a very American attitude. You know, what can we make now, today? Don't worry about investing. Don't look at future trends. Forget about that. What can we make today? And if you look at the so-called kings of industry and entrepreneurs, real class in this country, what do they invest in? Most of the time, it's just easy money, online sales. What can I say? There's nothing that requires major long-term investment. They just don't seem interested in that.
That has been our problem for decades, that we're not interested in the long term, whether it's political or indeed business. Tony,
it's just a mindset. It's just a British mindset, unfortunately. And this is why we don't produce anything anymore. Yeah.
Well, we do. We do.
Don't worry about him.
We do produce things. We're still at around 9, 10 or 11 in the top manufacturing nations of the world, but we used to be, I think, 7 or 8. In fact, I think we probably were number 1 at one stage, but we would have to go back quite a long time to look at that. Tony, thank you. Andrew says, of course the government is keen to keep fuel prices as high as they can to gain all that extra windfall tax on the average person. Again, I read somewhere that the Chancellor has got at least an extra £1 billion in through extra VAT revenues since the price of fuel increased. Right, let's take another couple of texts before we finish this hour. This is from Simon, who says, thanks for the inspiration. When I finally get my punk band together, I'm going to call it the Liz Truss Experience. Not quite sure what inspired that. How bizarre. Another one. Trump has really messed up and will not admit that Obama and Biden did the best that was possible. US citizens and world citizens will not forget his blundering in. Cost of living from this war and his other Putin-style copied. Not sure that makes grammatical sense. Vote him out. Will you? Well, I can't because I don't have a vote and he won't be able to stand again anyway. Or wake up with sending a message because the MAGA Trump incitement is state interference in our country. In our governance. That's from Ruth in Watford. Right, let's take another one here. We've done that one from Alison. We've done that one. Now, here's one that says... there was one about second-hand. Here we are. Top tip, Iain. If you want an electric car, buy a nearly new one on PCP. I would never buy a car on PCP. If you look at a certain German car company, there's literally 30 to 40% off list price, as they haven't yet worked out what the second-hand cost is for an electric. Huge savings to be made. Well, if you've been bitten once by PCP, you're never going to be bitten again, and I come into that category. The interesting thing is the second-hand market for electric cars is really booming at the moment, whereas a year ago, I mean, you could almost give them away. And that was always a disadvantage of buying a new second-hand car because the second-hand value was always a bit rubbish. That seems to be changing now. But look, the markets always find their level, and there are always going to be peaks and troughs. That is, I was going to say, the joy of the free market economy. Sometimes it isn't a joy if you want to sell your car when the second-hand market is in a trough. Anyway, coming up in the next hour, it is Cross Question. Joining me on the panel will be Toby Perkins, Labour MP for Chesterfield. He's the chair of the Commons Environmental Audit Committee. Baroness Claire Fox, non-affiliated peer, who's the founder and director of the Academy of Ideas think tank. Duncan Weldon is an economist and former economic policy advisor to the Labour Party, and the author of the book Blood and Treasure, The Economics of Conflict from the Vikings to Ukraine. And Emma Best is deputy leader of the Conservatives in the London Assembly and also a local councillor. They're here to answer your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. You can text 84850, and of course you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Sir Keir Starmer has given tech companies a 3-month ultimatum to block new devices from allowing children to send and receive nude images or face legislation. Jess Phillips, who quit as Safeguarding Minister, in part over delays over measures to protect children, says she wishes the ultimatum had been made a year ago. She's told LBC a device-level block implemented by Google and Apple would be effective across all apps.
If the device which controls your camera stops a child from taking that image, it can't share it, can't receive it, it won't be able to be groomed by the terrible paedophiles that I've seen operating in this space, and it would end 91% of all child sexual abuse online. So the app bit doesn't actually matter because it will be on the device.
Iran has agreed to stop striking Israel, but has also warned the Middle East will become hell if Israel keeps on attacking Lebanon. Last night, their ceasefire was tested to its limits when both sides fired missiles at each other. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry says the US must play its part.
The United States bears clear responsibility as a party to the April the 8th ceasefire understanding. Whatever happens in the region, direct responsibility of the United States is unequivocal, and the consequences of any escalation of tensions will also rest with the United States.
Israel has ceased its strikes on Iran but warned the war has not yet ended. Italian prosecutors are said to have put Israel's security minister under investigation over the treatment of activists who were part of the Gaza flotilla last month. There was international condemnation after Itamar Ben-Gvir was seen taunting activists caught by Israeli forces who were trying to deliver aid to Palestinians. Around 100 firefighters are tackling a fire at a recycling centre beside the railway line into London Bridge Station. People living near Millwall's football ground are being told to keep their doors and windows closed due to smoke. And Denmark's Christian Eriksen says he's doing well and is at home with his family after collapsing on the pitch last night. In a post on social media, the former Tottenham and Manchester United midfielder praised the doctors who've cared for his heart condition since he had a cardiac arrest 5 years ago. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 5 points at 10,373. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.16. LBC weather mostly dry this evening across England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight with lows of 4 to 8 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Katie Dartford.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, it's 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. Let me introduce my panel to you. On my left, Emma Best, Deputy Leader of the Conservatives on the London Assembly. Next to her, making his debut on the programme, Toby Perkins, Labour MP for Chesterfield. He's also the chair of the Commons Environmental Audit Committee. To my right, Baroness Claire Fox, non-affiliated peer, who's the founder and director of the Academy of Ideas. And next to her, Duncan Weldon, who is an economist, former BBC Newsnight economics editor, and the author of the book Blood and Treasure, The Economics of Conflict from the Vikings to Ukraine. Could have done with him in the last hour, couldn't we? So they are here to answer your questions on any subject you like. 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp on that number, you can text 84850, and you can watch us on Global Player, the LBC app, and the LBC YouTube channel.
Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Cross question. Watch live on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Let's take our first question. It's a WhatsApp question from George in Hastings. Have we reached the stage now where tech giants are more powerful than any government, even Trump's, and people like Keir Starmer are powerless against their might? Now, the government has today asked tech giants to implement new settings on their products to stop children from viewing, making and sharing explicit images. And Keir Starmer has vowed to introduce new laws if this doesn't happen within the next 3 months. The power of the tech giants, Duncan Weldon.
I mean, they're certainly very powerful, very large companies at the moment, and some of the investment into AI has been a really strong driver of global growth. Governments, particularly outside the United States, are clearly very keen to court these people because they want them building data centers in their countries. They want them investing in their nations. On the other hand, I think we've got to be careful to say they are more powerful than states. I'm sort of tempted to, quote Stalin on the Pope. How many divisions does the Pope have? How many divisions does Mark Zuckerberg have? We had a lot of this before 2008 when we were told that banks were now more powerful than the state. But when the banking crisis came, Davos man who had been saying the state was now irrelevant found himself knocking on the door asking for a bit of help.
And what do you think about this announcement today about making the online world safer for children? Because somebody I know who's very technically minded, so this is all about the politics of it. It's not about the practical consequence, because there is a difference between an Apple phone and an Android phone. And if you have an Android phone, you can't just flick a switch and do what the government seems to think that you can.
I think it's really hard. We do now have the evidence of Australia banning social media for teenagers or under 16s. The evidence that I've seen suggests that after that ban, about 50-60% of young people who were using social media are still using it, whether that's through a VPN or whatever. It's very, very hard. I sometimes wonder, I've got kids myself of the age that are on social media. I do worry about the impact on them. But I also worry that there's this acceptance that this may be bad for kids. I worry it's bad for adults as well, to be honest.
Claire Fox.
So I have real reservations about this call for a ban. First of all, for the reasons that have been indicated, which is it doesn't seem to me that anyone's thought through how it would work. I mean, even in terms of policing it, by the way, are you going to have police officers knocking on the door going, we have reason to believe your 13-year-old is using a VPN in the bedroom? There's a kind of bit of that goes on. I also think that we become far too prepared to blame social media and big tech for everything. And there is a danger then that what we're saying to young people is not showing them how to use social media responsibly. We're abdicating responsibility. If only you could make illegal everything that teenagers demand that they should be allowed to do. It would make life so much easier, but it wouldn't really.
It would make my life much easier.
I know. No, you can't go, and so on and so forth.
I'm just imagining you as a teenager now.
Or shouting at one. But, so I worry about that. But there are also serious consequences for adults in a different way, which is that age gating will mean that there is the equivalent of age gating for adults. You're going to have a form of digital ID for all people to gain access to social media. Not in all of the proposals, but in a lot of them. And secondly, at the moment, this kind of the announcement today, which says we're going to demand that no nude pictures taken. Of course, everybody says, oh, well, that sounds, that's absolutely right. And we're going to tackle the paedophiles. First of all, that means that we're telling big tech to scan all of our phones, in order to see whether there are nude pictures of children. So that's like quite an intrusion of privacy, right, for adults. Then you could say, well, it's against paedophiles. How can you possibly object to that? But actually, most child abuse happens amongst people, I think it's 97% is with people who know or part of the extended family or circle of the child. So I do feel, you asked if there was a kind of performative element to it. It does feel to me like politics. And I sat through many, many hours in the House of Lords arguing over this. I have to say I was quite isolated when I argued against the ban. I was really surprised at how over-enthusiastic the Conservative Party were demanding it. I watched, actually, I thought... Baroness Smith, Jackie Smith, trying to
dare say anything bad about her?
No, well, I'm going to be admiring. She tried to hold it off, but then gradually I could see them being worn down. You know, I mean, actually, unlike me, I had a lot of sympathy with the government saying, can we look at the evidence, please? Can we do a consultation? Can we not just panic? Can we not just do this? But gradually, they've kind of got wound down. And
public opinion is in favour of banning.
Oh, no, I understand it. Yeah, well, you know, as it goes, I'm a bit of a populist, but I don't actually think that public opinion should decide every single policy issue. I mean, I do think one has an obligation to take a step back and go, I understand why Mumsnet and all parents are demanding it. I get it. But that doesn't mean that it's the right solution. And even with young people, just because as a former teacher, you know, even when we're saying to teenagers, by the way, oh, it's addictive. I mean, there's nothing worse than giving them an excuse. What can I do? I'm addicted to it. You know, it's like, no, you've got to learn self-discipline. You've got to learn we've got to teach the young restraint. And so I just think there's an abdication of responsibility of dealing with a really difficult problem. So I know that social media can be a sewer, but it's not just a sewer. It's also creative. Massively important part of social communication. It's the public square, and we're about to give 16-year-olds the vote and tell them that they can't look at anything on social media before they get the vote. And that's where a lot of young people get their news. And you can't, I mean, as much as we want them all to be listening to LBC, you can't go, well, you've only got to get it traditional media. And as you'll know, even a wonderful show like LBC uses social media to get the word out. In other words, it's an important part of our democratic entitlement. And I do therefore think this magical age of 16, and, you know, it's a cliff edge that I worry about throwing young people off.
Emma Best.
Yeah, I'm afraid you got the wrong Conservative on this evening, because I'm in danger of sounding like a Labour shrill, because I actually am not in favour of the social media ban. I've got a 14-year-old, so he's at an age where I can speak to him about the online world. I don't like the idea that we're saying that when kids turn 16, at this age where they even more think they can think for themselves, that we're suddenly going to introduce them to this online world, which, like it or not, as time goes forward, the online and physical world are going to be intertwined even more. They have to get ready for the online world. And actually, I can have a conversation with my 13, 14-year-old and get him ready for that, try and make appropriate decisions. If he was 16, 17, 18, I don't think he's going to be as open to those conversations. He's going to be thinking he's an adult. And where does this social media ban land? He's on WhatsApp to speak to classmates in revision groups. He's got his rugby team where they talk about their tactics before every match. I mean, are they now banned on WhatsApp as well? There's some really serious conversations, but on that, there is more we can definitely do to keep them safe, and it doesn't need to be a knee-jerk reaction. And dare I say it, it's down to parents. My son that I just talked about, unfortunately, has much more restriction online than I did growing up. I was on every MSN thing and chat, every MSN, every chat room, every chat roulette, talking to random people, like, because my parents had no idea, and we would do these things, and we would talk to anyone, and I could be on my phone all day, all night. He's now got the limits on the phones, which are, and the thing I would like to see is the nudity filter. I mean, Claire, you talked about tech scanning our phones. I'm afraid they already scan all our phones every second, every day anyway. So the nudity filter, they could quickly make that stronger. I think there's a conversation to be had about who's in this debate, who wants the software to move forward, and who's just trying to carve out competition that can't do it as quick as them. There is something about that needs to be looked at, not just, and are they actually trying to keep people safe? So all in all, I think looking at trying to get these tech companies, the social media operators, to do more things like nudity filters, that is right. For example, we know curiosity is going to kill the cat. It's definitely going to be what teenagers do. So when you have a filter come up and say, this is nudity, would you like to see it? I mean, I think most teenagers are saying, I wasn't even bothered before, but yeah, now I'll have a look.
But your party leader, Kemi Badenoch, she's very committed to introducing this ban. She's got 3 children, not as old as your child, but you're not convinced by her arguments then?
I'm not. But like I say, you got the wrong Conservative tonight, because any other thing, I think we're actually on the right track, and I back Kemi 100%. But just on this one issue, I think everyone's heart is in the right place. But I think that we have to understand that times are moving. Look, I like, when I say I've got a 14-year-old, I like to tell people, don't worry, I'm not that old. I'm not old enough. I'm not old enough to have a 14-year-old. So I think I'm in this level of parenting where I had the online world, and now I'm raising a teenager. They're going to be even more in that world. They are going to understand that they parent their children online like in the physical world. If you wouldn't let your child go out after dark into the park, you wouldn't let them go onto Google after 10 o'clock in their bedroom with no one around. They get that. Unfortunately, a lot of people parenting now don't get that. So as we move forward, I think there's just got to be this realisation that these worlds are going to be intertwined, and parents are going to have to take responsibility, and I think the next generation are going to understand that a lot more than we do.
Toby Perkins.
Well, I think firstly, in terms of the announcement today, it's really positive. I was shocked to discover that 90% of the nude images of children were taken by themselves, and and this is one of the really positive things that comes out of this particular announcement. But actually, I think the discussion we've just heard in terms of the social media ban more generally shows why it isn't a tremendously nuanced issue, and why those who say that, let's just rush to ban it, we've already got all the evidence we need, we know it's causing harm, and it is causing harm, therefore just get on with the ban, are wrong, because there are so many things. I've had over 100,000, I think, representations, including over 12,500 from children, which is really positive, and children's voices are heard far too rarely in our political discourse. But there's a number of options the government could do. They could look at the ban at 16. They could introduce that ban younger, maybe at 12 or 14. They could look to do some kind of curfew. They could look to introduce time limits. Or there's all kinds of different ways that they could look at this. That isn't just going straight to the ban. And I also have a 14-year-old in the house who, for whom social media is almost entirely a positive experience, and will be heartbroken, genuinely heartbroken, if we say that she can't go on that anymore. And my worry is also that a lot of children who've never explored VPN and all of these kind of measures will be driven into aspects of the internet that they wouldn't currently explore, and we could cause all kinds of unintended consequences. So I think the government are right to be cautious. They're also right to recognise there is a huge public thirst for action on this, but a little bit of calm heads wouldn't go amiss on this.
Cynics are saying that, they've only announced this today to help keep Keir Starmer in his job. Now, I know you and I were on Newsnight together, and you were articulating the case for Keir Starmer to stay. I mean, frankly, whatever he does, he's damned if he does and he's damned if he doesn't, isn't he?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, I think that people will say that about anything that he does, and I think, realistically, today's measure is an important, a positive one. It's not going to, none of us expect it's going to be an absolute game changer in terms of how people perceive Keir Starmer one way or another. So I think that it's nonsense to say that. But it is important for all of us in the party to reflect on whether we want a government to be getting on with the things they're getting on with, or whether we want to sort of put a pause on everything and have 3 months discussing the best direction for the government to take.
But it has to be said quickly that he didn't just get on and do it. Jess Phillips had to resign to get him to even look at this properly.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, I think that we've been making quite a bit of progress in this whole direction. I think that every time that someone does something, people say, "Why didn't you do it sooner?" I'm pleased that he's taken this step, but I do also recognise, and we haven't even got to the end of this consultation yet. Some people could say, "Well, hang on, you're already legislating, you haven't got to the end of your consultation." I thought the consultation would be serious. You can criticise either way, but I think it's a welcome step that he's taken today, but I also think there'll be more to come.
OK. Right. It's 18 minutes past 8 here on LBC.
This is LBC.
3 heroes, 1
peace, and certainly Iran and Russia as well, which are linked to that nation. If the hostilities continue to expand, will we end up back in the economic situation of the 1940s when people were paying 45 and 50%? And I believe the top tax rate was 98%.
On unearned income, yes, it was. In fact, it remained that until the early 1980s. I'm looking at Duncan for help here. I think I've remembered that right. So, given the resumption of hostilities in Ukraine and Iran, does the panel think we could soon be back in the economic situation in the 1940s and paying 50% tax? Toby Perkins.
No, I don't think we're close to that. I'm very pleased that Britain isn't involved in this war, and I think it's thanks to our leader that we're not. When he rejected the advice from Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage to leap in behind the United States, but we're clearly affected by the war, whether we're in it or not, and it's already having a big impact on our economy, particularly in terms of fuel prices. Less so, but also in terms of energy prices, and so it is having a huge impact. It is particularly important that we therefore see this conflict coming to an end as soon as possible, and we take whatever steps we can, working with international partners, to try and ensure that cool heads operate. And we've seen, alarming signs over the course of the last 24 hours in Iran and Israel. And I think, Donald Trump clearly feeling huge pressure domestically to get America out of this war. And, he keeps trying to convince us that he's almost got a deal. But it's very clear that he's feeling under pressure as well. So there is, it's a moment of huge danger, but I think it's too early to say we're likely to lurch back into the situation of the 40s.
Emma.
It'd be extremely damaging if we did go that way. I mean, it's good to hear Toby say that, but I don't think we could trust anything from this Labour government and the amount of U-turns that we've heard. So that might be setting us up for the first one here. I think it's definitely true to say that, though, as the world becomes more and more unstable, things like manufacturing, food production, energy just becomes more and more important that we have production of that at home. And when you look at some of the decisions that have been made by the government, I don't think that takes into account how important it is to have stability at home. I think we have seen a change of direction now with energy, but I think when we look at some of the decisions made in terms of supporting farmers, there needs to be some serious policy kind of addressment there of what farmers need in order to have better food production at home. And when we look at manufacturing, how we can kickstart that and make sure that we are manufacturing at home. The world's becoming as more and more unstable, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. So all we have to do is have growth at home. That's the one and only thing we can depend on. And if we raid the pie, whilst the pie is still the size it is, then people are just going to have less and less and less. We need to grow the pie.
But you're talking about U-turns. The reality is the biggest U-turn in this is the U-turn Kemi Badenoch made from having said we should join the war to within 2 weeks or so saying, oh, no, we shouldn't. And her and Nigel Farage were in lockstep on that, and they were lockstep in coming out of it. So when it comes to serious decisions, that was an absolute example of why she can't be trusted.
So I think there's a difference between supporting the war and actually realising that the Ayatollah was killing his own people in the thousands and thousands and thousands. And I spoke to a number of groups in Iran that were suffering at the hands of that, and actually having the celebration of that moment of an ending of that dictatorship, I think was right. And I do think there's a difficult question here. It's not as easy as just saying no to America, and I know we'd like to, but that is our strongest ally. And when we turn around and look at that, we couldn't even survive a week in war. We can't even survive a week in war.
Right now?
I think what I'm saying is we're right to celebrate that the Ayatollah's reign in Iran was over and that there was thousands of people dying. I don't think we should ever be happy to go into war. But I think what we also need to realise is that we do need to be close to our allies, because our defence is in such a terrible position at the moment that if we went to war, we wouldn't even go last a week on our own.
Toby, that there is a difference between saying that we should have let the Americans use our bases and actually taking part in the military strikes. And you haven't made that distinction there, because that's what Kemi Badenoch said, the former, Nigel Farage said the latter.
Well, she certainly seemed to be suggesting we should have been far more actively involved than we were. I think that...
How so?
I think
How
that...
so?
It's what, sorry?
How so?
Well, that's precisely what she was saying. That she was, and everything you've just said in terms of the supporting the American war. It was clear to us that the legal basis of it. Well, the legal basis of it, I think, is hugely questionable, and for that reason, I think we were right to not be involved. And I think we're absolutely in the right place on that.
Claire.
The question was actually not just about Iran, it was about Ukraine as well. And I think the problem with the way that you're posing this, Toby, if you don't mind me saying, is that you've decided that that's a bad war and we're really brilliant because we kept out of it. I mean, we aren't out of it. That is the truth of the matter. And we are very much in relation to the Ukraine war, because we decided that's the kind of war we're on the right, and so on and so forth. The reason I'm saying that is because I think it's a bit more serious than did we go in the right war or not. This is the drumbeat of war and militarism is pretty loud. That kind of sense that international instability surrounds us, in that sense, the kind of 1930s, 40s, you kind of feel as though anything could happen. And I don't feel as though we've been serious remotely domestically in terms of that conversation. I know that we're now kind of dragging a kind of meagre increase in defence spending out of the government. It's been hard work getting that. We have, in fact, got a relatively pathetic example of our ability to defend our own country, and our contribution to NATO is paltry. And so we kind of all talk when it comes to Ukraine, no talk when it comes to Iran, if you see what I mean. And then, but it's a much bigger problem. So that's what I really feel as though whoever's in power, we need to have a serious conversation in society about the possibility, where we stand in relation to the way the world is going. And therefore, I do think that it's been such a disappointment that Labour, who I actually believed were going to do this naively for 5 seconds, that the talk about growth has been absolutely, completely contradicted by the action, because I genuinely think that unless we sort out our own economy at home and talk to our fellow citizens about the possibility of why we need that growth, not growth so that we can have a larger welfare state or a larger state dependence, but growth because we need to have some chance of surviving the kind of international whirlwind that's going to face us. And the energy situation has driven me mad. I mean, it's just ridiculous that we've got dragged down into this situation where ideologically we won't create or invest in the cheapest and most efficient energy sources in terms of fossil fuels, in terms of gas and so on and so forth. It's just ludicrous. And so I'm afraid I'm not convinced that we are. I don't think it's a question of Keir Starmer did a good thing when he didn't get dragged in by Trump. We are in NATO. We are obviously allies of America. The Iran situation isn't one we can kind of be sniffy about and go, we've got nothing to do with it. We've got to have a different kind of conversation at home, it seems to me.
Duncan.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're clearly in a much more uncertain world, and I think the signs of that have been there all the way since 2014, when Russia first, effectively invaded Ukraine, and that warning sign was sort of ignored by lots of policymakers, not just in Britain but across Europe. We're now in the second time Donald Trump has been elected US president, and yes, the United States is Britain's longest standing and most important ally, but also Donald Trump is at least more lukewarm to NATO and American defence commitments. And in this world, British defence spending is going to have to rise. I think actually, the state of our armed forces, nuclear deterrent aside, is really quite worrying. You've sort of seen that.
The nuclear deterrent is a bit worrying when all 5 submarines are in port.
I mean, it's worth saying there's a lot of talk across Europe of rearmament, but actually, the Baltic states, the Scandinavians, Poland, Germany is rearming very, very seriously and putting money in. Britain and France talk a lot about it, but the talk hasn't been followed through. I thought the Strategic Defence Review this government carried out, it was published in July last year, was actually a very good piece of work. But I am really quite, the lack of the defence investment plan now a year later really is quite worrying. I've spent a lot of time at defence conferences over the last year, which are incidentally the only conferences where there is a queue for the men's toilet, but not the women's, that I've been to. And it's been fascinating watching the confidence of that sector drain away. So last summer, lots of parts of the British defence sector thinking, OK, the British government is serious about rearmament. We're excited. Let us see the plans. By the start of this year, companies I'd met last July choosing to move to Germany because there's been so much delay from this defence investment plan.
In the immortal words of Theresa May, nothing has changed. Yeah. And I mean, judging by all the reports in the Sunday papers, nothing is about to change either, which... Well, anyway, we might talk a little bit about this in the second half of the programme. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:31 and Katie Dartford has the news headlines.
The former Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips has told LBC she's glad the government's announced an ultimatum to tech companies about children's access to naked images. Ms Phillips says she's certain that technology to prevent explicit photos being seen, taken or shared by minors can be activated quickly, as she's seen it being demonstrated. Israel says its war with Iran and Hezbollah is not over and has warned people in southern Lebanon to evacuate. The comments come after the ceasefire was tested to its limits overnight, with both Iran and Israel firing missiles at each other. And 15 fire engines and around 100 firefighters have been tackling a fire at a recycling centre in south-east London that's disrupting trains into London Bridge. A dark plume of smoke from the fire near Millwall's football ground in Bermondsey could be seen from the centre of the capital. LBC weather mostly dry this evening across England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight, lows of 4 to 8 degrees.
This is LBC.
Up to speed.
Your Formula
transport, to the cross-governmental transport, to the cross-governmental performance on air quality. So those are examples of some of the three things that we're looking at. We're looking at data centres coming up. So it's getting outside of the sort of individual departmental silos and looking at some of these cross-governmental environmental issues.
Duncan Weldon is here, an economist and the author of the book Blood and Treasure, The Economics of Conflict from the Vikings to Ukraine. How did you get the idea to do that book? Because, I mean, now that you've done it, it seems an obvious book to do, but I wonder why it wasn't done before.
Well, when I'm writing books, I like to write economic history because it's fundamentally easier to write about something that's already happened rather than speculate about the future. And I thought there was a gap for sort of popular economic history of war, because it's very important to how our economy is developed over the long run. And there's this interplay between war and economics I found fascinating. So it's a very fun book to research, and it's quite sad to see how timely it's become.
Well, indeed. Claire Fox is here, non-affiliated peer. So you're not a crossbencher, you just don't belong to any grouping.
That's right. There's an increasing number of us who are non-affiliated.
Do you have a little group?
We do, actually. We sit on the back row like the kind of naughty, the
I
naughty
can imagine.
kids.
Who else is in that group?
Well, Kate Hoey.
Oh, okay.
Which is good fun. I can't remember now. But there's people like Ian Austin, some ex-Labour people like that, and then of course David Frost left to run the IEA. And so he then become not affiliated, but now he's not running the IEA, but he hasn't gone back. And then I think Dan Hannan now, because he is running the IEA, so it's all. But it's a real right rag bag. But the most important, no, it's all right. But the most important thing is that I think that the crossbench has become kind of quite a group of the great and the good.
It really is, isn't it? Yeah.
And let's be honest, that was never going to work for me, and I was never going to work for them. So it's all happily sorted itself out.
See, that could be a question. Is Claire Fox great, or good, or both, or neither?
No, I think that neither is
right,
nice.
let's take a text question from Oscar in Lincolnshire. It was said over the weekend that the transport and environment budgets will be cut to pay for improvements to our clearly terribly equipped armed forces. What will it take for this government to do something about the ridiculous amount it's spending on welfare? Well, yesterday's Sunday Times reported that the transport and net zero budgets will be cut to fund improvements which will be set out in the long-awaited Defence Investment Plan, which may not be published until next month. Claire, let's start with you.
So, Toby, you might not have anything to audit at this rate. If they cut all the environmental targets, as it happens, that wouldn't upset me hugely. I think if anything ought to go, it's the overemphasis on environmental targets myself. The most important thing is that nobody will tackle the welfare issue. It was very disappointing there was no welfare bill in the King's speech. It's a hugely important issue which, as we know, in some ways almost split the government in half with the U-turns prior to this. And it's not just about, and it should never be allowed to be presented in this way, a kind of austerity measure to save money simply in relation to paying for increasing the hugely important arming of the country, because if you can't defend yourself militarily, what are we talking about? But nonetheless, it is absolutely sapping the morale of the country. And the interesting thing about even the conversation about war is I'm afraid that we're in danger of having generations of young people who are not resilient enough, or not able to be independent enough, or not kind of got enough capacity as individuals to really see themselves as, fighting for their country or seeing anything in the future. It just seems devastating that we've allowed a situation in which particularly health issues like mental ill health and the problems of overdiagnosis, which I've written a lot about over the years, not because I'm in any way glib about mental illness, because I started off as a mental health social worker, but because the term has become so expansive as to be meaningless. Exactly the same thing has happened with the likes of ADHD and other issues in relation to special educational needs and so on. And it's a disaster for those young people who then feel that they're not up to working. Now, I'm not even, I mean, there's obviously all sorts of practical things which the government is beginning to, think about jobs for young people. But every time I read a government proposal to encourage NEETs, for example, to go back into work, it requires spending more money on a kind of welfare dependency scheme to teach them how to go back to work. You think, oh, God. I mean, the whole thing just spirals out of control. So I think a much more brutal and ruthless intellectually, I don't mean brutal and ruthless to the individuals, approach to this is required. And I'm afraid there's no sign of getting it. So I just think that when I read that first of all, I don't want transport cuts, and I wouldn't mind the environmental audit being no longer necessary, because I do feel as though we've wasted a huge amount of energy trying to arrive at environmental targets. On too many things where I think it's a waste of time. But it just seemed like so paltry and pathetic. I just thought, we might have one more ship. You know what I mean? It didn't feel adequate to the task. So I want us to tackle welfare for reasons that go beyond money.
Russ corrects me. He says we've only got 4 Vanguard-class nuclear subs. It's the attack hunter-killers that are all in port, all need urgent maintenance that needs okaying by the Treasury.
Yeah.
Duncan.
So maybe this might pay for a bit of maintenance on the fort. Do you know what I mean? But that's about it.
I mean, I think when we're talking about welfare, we've got to be clear what we're talking about. And often people talk about the numbers going up a lot. And I think, an awful lot of that is because the population is older. We've had the triple lock. The state pensions bill has gone up considerably over the last 15, 16 years. If we look at just working age welfare, which I think is what we're talking about, we're having this debate, as a share of national income, it's roughly where it was 10, 15 years ago. So it's not surged. Now, what we do have is a very particular problem, a very recent particular problem, if NEETs, young people not in education, employment or training. Seen this big rise. Obviously, Alan Milburn's done this review for the government, which I think there's lots of good ideas in. I do wonder how much of this is still sort of a lingering impact of the pandemic. Yes. And that, the people who are under 24 today had all of that sort of, disruption to their lives in 2020, 2021. I wonder how much of that's a lasting impact and, whether the generation coming through schools now will face some of the same problems or not. But it's clearly an issue. I think there is a lot of good stuff in the Alan Milburn report, which hopefully the government will be able to crack on with in the coming months.
Toby.
Well, I think that we absolutely need to reduce the welfare bill. We need to do it by getting some of the 1.2 million people not in education, employment or training into work. I think it's absolutely sensible for government to be spending money to address the barriers, because anyone who looks at the number of people coming out of our schools with EHC plans and realises only 5% of those go on to get permanent employment will see why we're going to have the scale of this young people employment crisis that we inherited from the previous government, but absolutely need to address. So I think the measures that Pat McFadden's spelled out are absolutely sensible. Now, we do also need to address the welfare bill in terms of universal credit and others, but we need to tread very carefully on that. I was one of those who felt the government's approach last winter was a bit crass. It was taking a failing system and just moving the threshold a bit down from what we've inherited, and I felt that wasn't the right approach. I'm much more confident about the Timms review. I'd rather government got it right than did it quickly. The Conservatives need to be absolutely ignored on this subject. They talked about welfare reform when they came in 2010, and we had 14 years of a ballooning welfare bill, so they have no credibility on this whatsoever. But I think that it is important we reduce the welfare bill, primarily by making sure we get more people on the market for work, and we've already started making some positive steps on that, but also by making sure that we tackle the impact of those who do find that they're better off being out of work than in work, and increases in minimum wage are an important step in that direction. But we need to make sure that everyone that can work is available for work, and that is ultimately the way that you reduce the welfare bill.
So when Pat McFadden said in his famous message to Peter Mandelson that I spend my whole life having meetings with Labour MPs who want more spent on welfare and want to know which taxes can go up to pay for it, you will join the myriad of other Labour MPs who've denied that any of them have ever said anything like that to him.
Well, no, I've never said that to him or his predecessor. I mean, as I've just said to you, I do believe we need to make sure that work pays. We need to make sure that people that can work do work. We can't ignore the fact there's 1.2 million young people who aren't doing anything, and we need to get them onto the ladder. I think Duncan's right to say we're still paying the price of the pandemic. I would also say that the underinvestment in Sure Start is actually one of the factors in all of this. I think that we have a group of young people who have had too little of an investment in them. Sure Start was all about identifying people. We're trying to prevent those people arriving at the school gate at the age of 5 already 18 months behind. And so right. I think that we're paying the penalty for that whole sort of generational failure.
Emma?
It's literally frightening that someone could sit there and be that oblivious to what they've done in government. So you see, especially in things like the hospitality industry, you've lost 100,000 jobs, most of those young people, directly, in many cases, because of the VAT increases on the premises, and also because of the increase in national insurance contributions. To not directly see how you've infected young people's prospects, to not directly see how much that's increased the needs that we have in this country, the young people not in employment or education, it's just, I don't know how you could be that oblivious. And then to sit there and then no. And then to say, we'll then pay employers to hire young people, but let's just cut out the middleman. If you just reduce the costs on businesses, they hire young people. I know it firsthand from my local high street, which has really, really, really been hammered recently, and shops are struggling. It's the young people that go first. It's the people on work experience doing a couple of days on the weekend. That's the cost that they go, because any business owner will tell you that taking a young person on costs you money initially, because it's so much training, it's so much safeguarding with them. You have to really put your time in. And shop owners, small business owners are just saying, we're not going to bother with that. You don't need to do grants. You don't need to dress it up. All you need to do is reduce the cost.
If it was a simple that would have been working before, wouldn't it?
It was working to a degree. Well, it was a degree. It was working to a degree. It's under Labour that we've seen sickness and disability go up. We've seen unemployment in general go up. We've seen those claiming unemployment benefits go up. We've seen needs go up exponentially. We've seen job losses, the amount of job vacancies go down. We've seen 100,000 jobs lost in hospitality. These are just facts. So it has.
We've got more people working now than we had before.
It is facts. Okay. Unemployment's up. Well, clearly there's a higher population, but the unemployment in general has gone up.
Claire, very briefly.
Very briefly. I think, Toby, when you say there's more people working than ever before, I mean, that's the kind of thing that the nation are just going, get out more. You know what I mean?
But
I mean, there are more.
It's true, but I need to get out more.
No, because the reality.
It doesn't feel true.
You've just commissioned the Melbourne report precisely because you recognise there's a major crisis. So I just think saying, "Oh, there's more people, we don't need to worry." That's the way it sounds. But I think it comes over as complacent. Anyway, I wanted to make a point. I think it would be. We can't not mention the impact of immigration in this debate, because in relation to welfare, that's had a huge impact. And I think that what a lot of people feel is that the welfare services that are available, that there is a constant drive now, or competition for them, in relation to mass migration. And that's one of the things which has caused a lot of problems in society beyond money. But I do feel as though our services are being squeezed, welfare is going up, and people feel that it's not actually helping us. We were talking about the elderly, but it's not just that. It's the huge numbers of people who are in the country, often who are using welfare, the welfare state.
We do have to move on. It's 8:48.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents.
Donald Trump demands that Netanyahu not fire back at Iran, and he fires back at Iran. Is Donald Trump losing his power to control what is happening in the Middle East?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
At Waitrose, you know you're a food lover when
Well, just a bit of background to this. Donald Trump was asked to provide evidence for claims. Well, just a bit of background to this. Donald Trump was asked to provide evidence for claims that both the 2020 presidential election and also last week's primary votes in California had been fixed when he chose to end the interview. It should be noted that the interview had been very stop-start due to heavy rain affecting the sound at the barn it was taking place in. He had been talking about farming in the US earlier in the day. Emma.
Yeah, well, I think there's certainly a similarity between the two. I don't know about two peas in a pod, but certainly a similarity. And I think that Nigel Farage is showing now that he can't stand up to scrutiny in opposition, let alone imagine that in power. I think some of the things that Reform are doing as an entity now speak to those values that are being pushed. So I think things like last week was the most distasteful thing I think I've seen Reform doing, when they twisted Kemi's words when she was talking about Henry Novak's murder, and trying to create a divisive race war over those words, where they took out of context her saying, I don't want to hear Black Lives Matter, I don't want to hear White Lives Matter, everyone matters, and twisting that to make it something really divisive. And that's worrying. And I think there's a certain element of that in American politics, which, although sometimes British politics is ugly, I feel like it's never gone quite down the line of divisive.
You accuse Nigel Farage of not being able to stand up to scrutiny. Yeah, if he does a press conference, he will take questions from every single journalist in the room. Whereas if Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch or Davey do press conferences, they have a list of maybe 6, maybe 8 favoured journalists that will ask the questions.
I think that if you see that Nigel Farage also does that as well, and basically, as much as I love a lot of the news on GB News, I watch it a lot, there's a lot of favourable media there that both Nigel and other senior Reform politicians seem to lean towards where they can, which is fine and acceptable. Everyone does that. So, whereas you say Keir and Kemi do that, Nigel does that too. And
he does actually take questions from anybody that wants to ask one.
And I think, like I say, I think he would lean to media outlets that he likes, even in those press conferences, as do Kemi and Keir.
You obviously haven't watched any of them then, because he takes questions from the Mirror, the Guardian, whoever wants to ask one.
I agree, but I'm saying that he's also leans towards the media, doing more media with those outlets where there's more of a positive spin. But also, I've seen him get quite defensive in a number of interviews. I think one was it Beth Rigby that was probing on the £5 million, and clearly doesn't want to speak about that at all or have a prepared answer. So there's you have seen that, and that's been instilled, I think, in a number of senior politicians across Reform that have happily walked away from interviews where they don't like the questions.
Toby?
Well, I mean, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that Nigel Farage has so far got away with the £5 million donation, or not gift, I should say.
Got away with it. I mean, it was legal.
Well, I mean, we will see what happens in terms of that. But if you think of the furore there was over Keir Starmer's glasses, I mean, this would just, if a revelation like this over Keir Starmer, he wouldn't have been in power for 20 minutes after that. I mean, we clearly, Nigel Farage is absent from Parliament. You barely see him there. Richard Tice very clearly considers himself to be the Reform leader in Parliament. And I think there's a very interesting tension there. Richard Tice is doing a lot of the work in Parliament. Nigel Farage is barely there. But in terms of the question, I think that obviously there are similarities, but I think that Nigel Farage, will come under tremendous scrutiny, and I think I make a prediction here that he will not be the Reform leader at the time of the next election.
Oh, well, that's an interesting one. Put your bets on now, Claire Fox.
The question, I don't think the two examples are remotely similar. I think that Trump played a very dangerous game and has played a very dangerous game when he's tried to deny the outcome of an election. And losers' consent is obviously hugely important, and he's very thin-skinned about it. The £5 million donation is something that Farage is going to have to deal with the press, but he hasn't done anything illegal. That's what he'd say, and he'd think there's an obsession with it. I did want to say something about this kind of idea of the ugly politics, though, because I also agree. I agree with Emma completely. I hated that Reform attack ad against Kemi Badenoch, but I also hated the booing and jeering of Farage when he spoke in Parliament about the cold, blind fury in relation to Henry Novak. I thought what he said was legitimate. I thought that he was entitled to say it. And to say that he was trying to whip up trouble and incendiary language is going to whip up trouble on the streets, I think actually missed the point. And if you look at the moment what's going on, where there's a kind of anyone but reform, it's quite anti-democratic. I mean, my goodness, the Fire Brigades Union, and I'm a great supporter of the trade unions, has just basically said that anyone who's in the FBU in Manchester who stands for reform or is known to be supporting reform, they're compiling a list and trying to isolate them. I don't think that's the way that Labour is going to win and deal with the very legitimate issues which led millions of people to vote for reform in local elections and not for the mainstream parties.
And we know that from a survey out last week that in the trade unions, there are equal numbers of people supporting reform and Labour. But you were a member of the Brexit Party in the European Parliament, which Nigel Farage was obviously leader of, but you're not in reform now. Why?
No, I'm not. I joined the Brexit Party to get us out of the European Union, which we'd voted for. And it was a very temporary moment in my life. I am sympathetic to a lot of what the aspirations of people who vote for reform I believe in. That's it. And I do want to see a shake-up of mainstream politics. And I thought that the local elections was very important. I think the complacency of taking the voters for granted has to end for Labour and Tories.
I think in terms of ugly politics, in terms of how you deal with these sorts of questions from journalists. I can remember at the BBC covering the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. And that was the first time I'd experienced being booed when asking questions. Very, very aggressive yes crowds. And then that sort of thing became very common during the Brexit referendum. When I watch press conferences now, you see that quite a bit, I think, at Reform press conferences, more so than other parties. And yes, they may be taking questions from the Mirror and the Guardian, but when the Mirror and the Guardian stand up, there will often be a lot of activists in the room booing the question.
Happens at Keir Starmer's press conferences as well. I've seen it. Right, we just have time for. I apologise to the caller that I didn't quite have time to get on. John, our fun questions from Peter in Exeter. So Idris Elba has ruled himself out of playing James Bond, saying he was never in the race to become 007. But which actor, living or dead, would be your dream choice to have played Bond at some point? I'll give you a start of a 10. Ian Ogilvy, who used to play the Saint. Claire, you're possibly the only one on the panel that might
old enough
that.
To yes.
Yeah, sorry. As soon as I started that sentence, I regretted it.
No, not at all.
Anyway, what's your answer?
I don't know. I haven't got one, so you have to come back to me.
Duncan.
He's a little bit old for it now, but I'd go David Tennant, who I think would give it a sort of Roger Moore vibe.
Oh.
I thought you were about to say Iain Dale, and now I can't get it out of my mind.
That would be too creepy. Emma?
If you're not going to do it, Iain, then
my knees wouldn't be up to it.
Yeah, fair enough. I think maybe make it a woman, really, really annoy people. General Tager.
Any woman in...
General Tager, maybe? Someone like that.
Who?
General Tager.
Never heard of her. Toby.
Next James Bond.
Well, I mean, personally, having been in the parliamentary tug of war last week, I'd be proposing Al Carnes as a potential James Bond. I've got a bit of a man crush having seen his performance there, but he isn't an actor, but I think he'd do a great job.
OK. Have you thought of someone, Claire?
No.
Honestly, you've let us all down.
Because I can't remember anyone's
You've let the panel down and you've let your country down.
Do you know what? The person I thought of was Frank Sinatra, and then I thought, but he's American, it won't work. But I just think he's got something about him. And I went to see Sinatra, the musical, at the weekend. And
for goodness sake.
Exactly. Well, you shouldn't ask me then. I mean, I'm hopeless at this last question on your programme.
Well, it's just as well you're brilliant at all the others, isn't it? Right, on tomorrow's panel, we have the new Green Party Mayor of Hackney in East London, Zoe Garbett. I want to get her deputy on. I saw an interview with him on Instagram yesterday. He's 19 years old, and shall we say has some interesting views on landlords. I'm looking at Chris when I'm saying this. We also have the Conservative peer and former Cabinet Minister Lord Redwood, EU relations expert and former Labour advisor Mike Buckley, plus the journalist and media executive Anna Van Praag. So, thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. Now, What are we doing in the next hour? I've completely forgotten. We're doing online safety. We're going to be talking to Munira Wilson. She's the Liberal Democrat education spokesperson. And she got an urgent question in Parliament today. The Liberal Democrats have a very different view of what should be done on online safety to the government. But the question is, do you think the government is going fast enough on this? Do you think there should be a complete ban? Because it is rumoured that next week that's exactly what they're going to announce, which makes you wonder, well, why did they make today's announcement if they're going to announce that next week? Who knows? We're looking forward to your calls on this. 0345 6060 973.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the former Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips has told LBC she's glad the government's announced an ultimatum to tech companies about children's ability to share naked images. The Prime Minister said if the firms don't prevent it within 3 months, then new laws could hold them criminally liable for safeguarding breaches. Ms Phillips says a solution is perfectly possible.
Nudity filters already exist on all of our phones, so this is not a new thing. What is new about what we're asking them to do is to make them default, not that children get to say yes or no, or parents have to log in on every single different app. It is completely technologically possible because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Iran's military says it's halting operations against Israel after a major test of the April ceasefire overnight. Israel has also reportedly agreed to stop striking Iranian infrastructure on the orders of the US president. Former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, John Brennan, has told LBC it's not just political pressure on Donald Trump now.
I think more fundamentally is the continued high price of oil. A lot of Americans are traveling on their vacations, and the price of oil has gone sky high. This is something that I think is putting pressure on Donald Trump and even his advisors at the White House.
15 fire engines and around 100 firefighters have been tackling a fire at a recycling centre in southeast London. A dark plume of smoke from the fire near Millwall's football ground in Bermondsey could be seen from the centre of the capital. Ukraine's presidents met the king at Windsor Castle. Volodymyr Zelensky held talks with Sir Keir Starmer at Downing Street yesterday. The EU has voted to give Kyiv nearly €3 billion more towards its conflict with Russia. Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, the Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College London, told LBC that Ukraine is having some success in reclaiming territory and striking deeper into Russia.
Crimea is now virtually completely cut off. There's petrol rationing, there's Russia on the supermarkets, and all the things that indicate a place in difficulty. And it's not just Crimea. The city of Donetsk is facing similar problems as well.
And the England and Wales Cricket Board is investigating a breach of team protocols. Captain Ben Stokes and fast bowler Gus Atkinson were involved in an incident in a nightclub just hours after the first Test win over New Zealand. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 5 points at 10,373. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.16. LBC weather mostly dry this evening across England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight. Lows of 4 to 8 degrees. Sunshine and showers tomorrow with a high of 15 to 19. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Katie Dartford.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
5 minutes past 9 on LBC. If you're a regular listener to LBC, you'll know that we take the issue of online safety very seriously. We've actually devoted whole days to the issue. So the fact that Keir Starmer has announced rules designed to make it impossible for children to use technology to take, share or view nude images today is something that I wanted to talk about for an hour on the programme tonight, not least because Munira Wilson, the Liberal Democrat education spokesperson, had an urgent question on this in the Commons. We're going to be talking to her live in the studio in just a few moments' time. But before we do, let's hear the answer to her question, which was given by the Online Safety Minister, Kanishka Narayan.
The Prime Minister has announced that this government will take decisive action to strengthen children's online safety, including new expectations on technology companies to introduce crucial safety measures on children's phones. The government is clear that children are facing unacceptable levels of sexual harm online, including grooming, sextortion and coercion into sharing intimate images. A single image can trap a child in a cycle of abuse, something I've personally heard of from young people, from families, from civil society, and I hold them in my mind and heart as we take action to stop this harm at source. To address this, we have set out expectations that technology companies introduce device-level protections for children. These protections will prevent children from taking, sharing or viewing nude imagery across all core device functionalities. This includes camera, messaging apps, search functions and file sharing, and these protections are built directly into the operating system. We recognise that companies have already developed and implemented nudity detection on devices. We want to work collaboratively with industry to build solutions, to call on companies to take action within 3 months. We have been clear that if industry does not meet our high expectations, we will not hesitate to legislate. Furthermore, the government's Growing Up in the Online World consultation closed on the 26th of May. The government is currently reviewing the responses and will provide an update in the coming weeks.
Well, that was quite a combative answer from the Minister there.
Heard a subsequent answer.
Well, Munir, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but first of all, I want to read out something that a friend of mine, Phil Hendren, who's a real tech expert, he posts online under the alias Dizzy Things. And he thinks that what the government has announced today is ludicrous and cannot work for technological reasons. And let me just read this because I think it'll inform our discussion. Yeah. He says this 3-month ultimatum demanding Apple and Google block explicit image sharing for minors sounds like a swift, noble win for child safety. But it's technical nonsense and a complete fantasy that ignores how mobile ecosystems actually work. And here's why it will fail. The government claims the tech is already on our phones and companies just need to switch it on. This misunderstands the fundamental differences between Apple's iOS and Google Android. You can't just flip a single switch on two entirely different architectural backbones. Apple operates a closed ecosystem, already has on-device communication safety tools that blur nudity in native apps, FaceTime messages. But Starmer wants a device-wide prevention, blocking taking or sending a photo anywhere. That requires a massive architectural rewrite. If Apple has it tough, Google faces an impossible task. iOS updates push to almost everyone instantly. Android is deeply fragmented. Google can update its Pixel devices, but what about Samsung? I don't know how to pronounce this, Xiaomi, Motorola or Oppo? They all run custom versions of Android. 3 months is a joke in software engineering for OS-level deployment. To roll out cross-ecosystem device-wide on-device AI filtering without breaking API integrations, this is where I switch off, for third-party apps like WhatsApp or Snapchat, a single bug could bring millions of devices down. What about older phones? Millions, and this I think is the crucial issue here. Millions of children in the UK use hand-me-down devices or older tech that no longer receives OS updates. Even if Apple and Google code a miracle patch tomorrow, legacy hardware running outdated software literally cannot receive or run it. Here is the real danger. Unintended consequences. If new UK-compliant phones completely lock down photo features, it will instantly supercharge a massive grey market for unmatched older second-hand handsets. But trying to mandate a quick fix, the government will inadvertently push the most vulnerable kids towards older, entirely unmonitored devices bought off eBay or Facebook Marketplace, handsets that don't receive security patches at all, making them less safe. This is nearly finished. We need real structural solutions for online safety. Arbitrary 90-day deadlines designed for snappy London Tech Week headlines aren't it, and neither is threatening to legislate it. Good policy requires technical literacy. This won't happen. It's neither practical or doable, and if they legislate for it to happen, it doesn't change the technical reality of what will happen. Additionally, there are 1,500 to 2,000 distinct Android device models actively connecting to UK cellular networks every day, with 6 or 7 versions of Android 11 to 17 in use. It's impossible as well as dumb. Now, I don't know how much of that you were aware of. I certainly wouldn't have been aware of any of it before I read it. But, I mean, that sort of gives the lie to what a meaningful announcement the government is saying this is.
Yeah, look, clearly your friend and contact is extremely knowledgeable and an expert in this area. Certainly I was aware of some of what he was saying insofar as Apple's already got some of this technology operating on their devices and in their systems. But with Android, there is a separate app that is downloadable that can be applied to different devices. Clearly, it is a very technical area, but I go back to actually what Jess Phillips said in her resignation letter, that this is something she'd been working on with civil servants for a year and been begging the Prime Minister to come forward with an announcement about. So I have no doubt that there are some brilliant civil servants who are working with these experts and are experts themselves in terms of how to implement this. I suspect the reason why you've got this rush through announcement with 3 months to implement is because we've got a Prime Minister who's hunting for a legacy.
You old cynic.
It's true. I mean, it's just suddenly he's coming out with announcements. I mean, a few months ago, he was dead set against any sort of restrictions on teenagers for social media. It's now, as you've said, widely being briefed that he's going to come out with an announcement in the next week or so. We've just been through all of the parliamentary ping pong with the children's bill where we were trying to get amendments in and they kept voting it down and they had to be pushed into a corner on this. So, I think it's very clear to me, reading and listening to what people like the NSPCC have said, someone like Jess Phillips, who was working on this at the heart of government until recently, that clearly there are solutions that are technically possible, that they could have started moving on sooner. And it may well be that, as your friend says, that it needs time to bed in and roll out. And this isn't a silver bullet. I think this is one of the weapons we need in the armory. The social media restrictions is another one. Doom scrolling caps is another one. Safety warnings, sort of health warnings on certain apps is another one. Raising the digital age of data consent is another. All of these things that Liberal Democrats have been leading the way on over the last year, putting forward proposals in Parliament, pushing votes and being told no, 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 no. And suddenly they're being speeded up because we've got a Prime Minister who knows he's on his way out.
But he's damned if he doesn't, damned if he doesn't, isn't he? Because if he's done what Jess Phillips wanted him to do. Now, if he hadn't done it, he would be criticised for not doing it, and now you're criticising him for doing it.
I'm not. Well, I'm criticising him for having waited so long to make an announcement, notwithstanding the technical challenges. Which, as I say, I'm not a technology expert. I'm going on what people in the sector and reading and hearing what people like Jess have said about this issue. That they could have moved on this sooner, and that they should be legislating, even if the implementation takes some time because of the technical challenges. Everybody knows that big tech companies don't have children's interests at heart because they're making billions and billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars out of our children and young people around the globe. And so I think just sort of asking them nicely in the next 3 months, make sure you do this, otherwise we're going to legislate, will be interesting to see what they actually do. And I think if they'd brought forward legislation soon, we've seen government can legislate quickly. The business at the moment is pretty light because they're trying to send everyone to Makerfield. They could easily have got some legislation through to force this issue, even if the implementation timeline needed to be longer to meet your friend's requirements.
What was the point of the urgent question, and what did you make of how the minister responded?
So the urgent question was twofold. It was to make sure that there was a chance to have some parliamentary scrutiny on Keir Starmer's announcement this morning that was made at London Tech Week, because that wasn't made to Parliament. But also, importantly, the stories that were being briefed to the press over the weekend, the Times was running a headline last night and this morning, that the government is about to bring forward a social media ban and to ask the government to start to provide more details. Because, as I say, for months they've been telling us it's too soon, we want to consult, we want to talk to experts. And now suddenly they're saying we're going to come forward with something. So come and shed some light on the matter and tell us what you're going to do.
Maybe I'm getting the wrong end of the stick here, but if they do come forward with that next week, which is the rumour, what was the point of today?
Well, to try and get more information out of them. Why are they...
No, I didn't mean about you. I mean, what was the point of them announcing it today?
Well, what they announced today was separate to a social media ban for teenagers. It was this ban on child sexual abuse images either being taken on devices or being distributed on devices. The social media ban for under 16s, if that's what they come forward with, we think from the briefing that was given to the Times last night, they're actually looking at something slightly closer to the Liberal Democrat proposal, which is more of a variable age limit dependent on the harmfulness of your platform, and that.
So WhatsApp could be used sort of like down to 12 or
but potentially. I mean,
Snapchat,
I think if you talk to parents and teachers, I mean, just because you've taken the WhatsApp example, if you talk to parents and teachers, actually they say the big, massive WhatsApp groups that you get with 100, 200 pupils in them are actually pretty harmful, because that's where a lot of bullying type images and other harmful images go around like wildfire, and there's hundreds, like thousands and thousands of messages in a short space of time. So I would say if we went for a harms-based approach, which is what we Liberal Democrats have proposed, but also lots of the charities and other advocacy groups that work in this space have proposed a harms-based approach rather than a blanket under 16 ban with a list of sites that would fall under it. I would say in a harms-based world, you would say, well, actually, having WhatsApp, having anyone under 16 on WhatsApp with hundreds of other people might be quite harmful, but actually, I don't know, let's say an arbitrary number of a limit of 8 or 10 people on a WhatsApp group means you wouldn't be outlawing the family WhatsApp group, which in the modern day and age is absolutely crucial to how we live life.
Emma Best, who's a member of the London Assembly, she was on the panel on Cross Question. Yeah. And she's a Conservative who disagrees with the Conservative line on this, because she said, well, look, my 14-year-old's in a WhatsApp group of his rugby team. Yeah. So is it 15 people in a rugby? I don't do rugby. I think it's 15 people in a rugby team. So, I mean, for each different thing, you can't, if you set an arbitrary limit of, you said 8, well, that obviously then they couldn't have their rugby WhatsApp group. Yeah. If you set it at, 20, there'll be other pastimes that, I mean, it's a bit, either you ban it or you don't, surely.
Well, no, but that's why we say we go for a harms-based approach. I think a messaging app that allows you to be messaging 200 people at a time clearly is much more open to harm. You would have to set, I think, a threshold, if just because we're getting into the weeds with WhatsApp, and that might mean that, yes, a rugby team is out, but a large family is in, because we recognise that in the functioning of everyday life, you need to, lots of families use WhatsApp. But the key thing with our approach is saying a blanket under 16 ban with a list of sites doesn't work. And already we're seeing from early results from Australia that lots of people are flouting it. And actually having a harms-based approach, you're incentivising platforms to come up with less harmful platforms for younger people if they really want to get them on those platforms. And we hear from lots of underrepresented groups and minority groups that for them actually being able to access social media is key to finding community and support. And so I think there's lots of unintended consequences if you just have a blanket ban at 16. And that's why we're saying harmful social media, so your Instas and your Snapchats and your X's and so on, you'd set at a default of 16. And for those that are even more harmful, you could even go up to 18. And I would argue X should probably fit into that category. And those that are less harmful would perhaps have a lower age threshold.
So you'll happily let people vote at 16, but you won't let them inform themselves about what's going on in current affairs on platforms like X. I mean, that's ludicrous.
Well, X. Look, we saw with the Grok scandal earlier this year, the sort of material that X is allowing on, I would say, in terms of pornographic content and violence and so on, there is a case for that to be rated at age 18. But there's plenty of other platforms that I think would be suitable for 16. And as I say, in our harms-based approach, there would be platforms that would be accessible at a younger age. And that's precisely why we have said you need a variable age limit based not just on the content, but also on the algorithms that drive the addictiveness of certain platforms. And one of the things we've been pushing for a long time is for something called the digital age of data consent to go up from 13 to 16. So at the moment, as soon as you're 13, You're able to give consent for these big tech companies to collect your data. They harvest that data, they monetize it, they use it to feed these really dangerous algorithms. A number of European countries have now switched that up to 16. That could have been done easily. We've been pushing for it since last year. And that is an easy way that whilst children and young people can still access social media platforms, that they can't then they won't be fed so much harmful material because the tech companies won't be able to harness their data.
Well, we could talk for the rest of the hour, just you and I, but I do need to get calls on.
I'm sure your call is
We've gone way over our
strong
time.
Views.
Munira, thank you very much indeed
Lovely
for coming in. You've had a bit of a long day today, haven't you?
Relatively. I mean, it's a normal Monday standards where I have work in the constituency in the morning and then 2:30 till normally 10:30, but actually business finished a bit early. So.
Well, you can go home now.
I will do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's Munira Wilson, Liberal Democrat education spokesperson and MP for, well, it says
Twickenham.
No, you are Twickenham,
Twickenham.
yes. No, I was getting you mixed up with Sarah Olney there.
Yeah.
I was about to say Richmond Park.
No, I'm Twickenham. Much nicer. I was going to say it's much nicer side of the borough.
Right, your call's next. And the question we're asking, is the government going far enough when it comes to children's safety online? What do you think of the announcement today? How would you tweak it? 0345 6060 973. It's 22 minutes past 9.
This is LBC.
Close your eyes. Take a deep breath and come on in to Classic FM Calm, LBC's soothing sister station. Find peace in the music with Classic FM Calm. Listen on Global Player or ask your smart speaker to play Classic FM Calm.
Daniel liked how easy it was to transfer.
Would like to clarify that. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. We're talking about online safety. Is the government going far enough when it comes to children's online safety? A lot of people think, well, look, if you think that it's dangerous for under 16s to use social media, just announce a ban, just as they have in Australia. Now, the Australian experiment, and it is an experiment, I suppose, is only a few months old. And at the moment, around 40 to 50% of under 16s in Australia are finding a way around this ban. But that still means that 50 to 60% are adhering to it. So you could say, well, that is progress. But obviously, if you're going to try and do this, you need to try and come up with a system that actually works. And I think, as we heard there from the blogger Dizzy Thinks, it's quite difficult to come up with something that is a catch-all that will prevent every single 16-year-old from accessing social media. You can argue that it's impossible, but does that mean to say that you shouldn't try? If you look at the public opinion polls on this, the majority of people do think there should be an outright ban on use of social media for the under 16s. Albert says, don't parents have a responsibility when buying these high-tech mobiles that have the capability that can get these dangerous apps, etc.? I think you're absolutely right. There should be a lot of parental responsibility here. And to be fair, I think most parents do take their responsibilities here quite seriously. But the problem is that a 10-year-old is probably more technically knowledgeable than the parent. So that's always going to be quite a difficult one, isn't it? And you can have all sorts of parental controls on phones. That doesn't mean to say that you can literally control everything that your child can see on their mobile phone. Now, you could say, well, don't let them have a smartphone. Have an old-style Nokia where, someone here, Lucy, says, switch phones back to calls and texts only, problem solved. Up to a point, because if you have your child just with what we used to call a brick phone, which is just texts and calls, and all of their friends just have the proper smartphones with all the different apps, all the different capabilities, well, is that really viable in the long term? I'm not sure it is. Now, the Conservative Party position is that you should just ban it completely. And Kemi Badenoch, I think, has been quite eloquent in explaining why. I'm very rarely in favour of banning things almost just for the sake of it. This isn't for the sake of it, of course, is it? But you know what I mean. I like to think that there is a responsible way of handling things without having to issue an outright ban. But I wonder whether you think that is indeed possible. 0345 6060 973. Let's go to Zach in Kensington. Hello, Zach.
Hello there. Thank you for having me. What a great topic.
Hi, what would you like to say?
I feel that I have twins myself. I have kids. They're teenagers, 15. They're very responsible online, and I don't feel like this restriction is really necessary. Very well-mannered, well-behaved children. I feel
yes, but what about those children that don't have the responsible parents like you?
I feel that it's majority of them. I feel like it's very uncommon to have children that are. Most parents are responsible, and it's very uncommon. There's a population of millions of people. So I feel like these children have bigger issues, and that's their poor education. And I feel like I would love to speak to an education minister. These same children that are so well behaved, my daughters, are really struggling in their GCSEs, and they spend 6 hours a day, 30 hours a week, learning history and geography and all these other subjects that I do not learn anything from, when they should be focused on English, maths and science, narrow it down to education. Let's focus on the core subjects. Let's get more engineers, more doctors. We've got really big issues. How is children failing 9, 10 GCSEs and they study 30 days a week from the age of 3 years old? And then we are importing doctors and engineers and so on from all around the world. Our education is horrendous. We've got big issues really to deal with as a nation than their social media, if that makes any sense.
I don't agree with you on a lot of what you say. It does. There is a certain logic to what you're saying, but I don't believe that our education system is broken in the way that you seem to think it is. I think it is right for children, I would say certainly up to the age of 14, to have a broad-based education in all sorts of different subjects, because how can they then judge? We can't just use schools as factories to churn out mathematicians and engineers. Of course, we want those, but we also want people with broader skills too, don't we?
Yeah, I agree with you. But currently, we're just churning out future benefits. People that are going to go on benefits because they're failing their GCSEs. They're likely going to work in low-cost jobs, and then we're importing educated people. I feel like well-mannered, behaved kids, they just need more maths and science and English. I'm not saying drop history and so on, but they need to emphasize more on the subjects which benefit society the most. Some schools are doing really well. They're a bit more strict. Like, I don't want to mention any schools, but I know some schools that their kids are getting better grades than private school kids, and they're quite disciplined.
No, I agree with you.
There's also an issue with discipline in schools as well. That's another side thing.
Yeah, but you can't. We all think of our own education, and I think I had a good comprehensive school education. But if I had been forced to do much more science and much more maths, I would have come out of that school feeling like a failure, because I was utterly useless at science and not particularly good at maths. I'd scraped to grade C GCSE maths, and I was, I'll say, more than encouraged to do biology and physics at O-level, and I failed both of them. In fact, I got ungraded in physics because my brain couldn't work in that way. Yet I was really good at art subjects. So it's very difficult to devise an education system that can meet the requirements of every single child. I completely understand that, and ideally you would have a bespoke education for every individual child. But I mean, that's just not possible, is it?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's a very complex subject. But at the end of the day, I studied history for 5 years, and I don't recall much of it. I studied geography, I studied many subjects, and I just wish it's not so much the education is too broad. It's more so there's a real lack of discipline. I think there are state schools doing exactly the subjects that we're discussing, but because they have more discipline, the kids are doing really well. So I think it's more of the discipline in the classes. Like, for example, they're timed how long they have to go from one class to the other class. There is a state school that does that in the UK, and the kids are timed from each class to each class, how long they take, and they have to be there within a certain time, and they have Saturday detentions and so on, and the school's doing amazing. And I spoke to their sixth formers, and I said, because there are articles saying that they're too strict and so on, but I spoke to the sixth formers because it's not far from where I live, and they said, look, from 5 of them, 4 of them were studying STEM subjects or medicine and so on. And that was just random 5 kids I spoke to. And they were so happy and so inspired to be studying these STEM subjects. And one of them was studying economics. And I want that for all the children. And I believe that it's more, and the children have that within them to become great. And we can later on provide these skilled people all around the world and bring services to, like, there's so much potential basically we have if we just look a bit more into maybe the discipline side and within the school, and people talking, like my daughter will say my name is called 10 times in a class. 10 times my daughter will be in a class and someone will be mentioning and kids will be talking and so on. And I feel like maybe there's more that could be done. The issue more so is that the people that are making legislation, their kids don't go to state school, so no one really. It's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Well, that's up to a point. That's true, but only up to a point. I think the other point to make on that, and we're slightly going off the subject here, but it's an interesting diversion, is that a lot of the kids that go to these high discipline schools actually approve of it themselves. They know that they're getting a much better education because of the high levels of discipline. Thank you very much, Zach. 0345 6060 973. Is the government going far enough when it comes to children's safety online? And what's been your experience? I mean, Zach there said that his kids are perfectly behaved on social media and he's not got a problem with them. But let's hear from people whose kids haven't been so well behaved on social media and have actually had some horrible experiences, maybe through no fault of their own. It's 9:34 on LBC News Headlines with Katie Darford.
Sir Keir Starmer's told tech bosses that standing by is not an option when it comes to the safety of children online. The government's announced a 3-month ultimatum to tech companies to prevent children being able to take or receive explicit images or be held criminally liable for safeguarding breaches. Israel says its war with Iran and Hezbollah is not over and has warned people in southern Lebanon to evacuate. The comments come after the ceasefire was tested to its limits overnight, with both Iran and Israel firing missiles at each other. And the England and Wales Cricket Board is investigating a breach of team protocols. Captain Ben Stokes and fast bowler Gus Atkinson were involved in an incident at a nightclub just hours after the first Test win over New Zealand. LBC weather mostly dry this evening across England and Wales, but frequent showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland. These will spread to most areas overnight, lows of 4 to 8 degrees.
Weekdays from 7 a.m.
Why do you need consultation? Who's going to say no?
Straight to the point.
Let's see. Why let's see? This is what I don't understand.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Why won't they listen to the most successful living Labour Prime Minister? Arguably the most successful Labour Prime Minister of all time.
Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app. Download it now from your app store.
It's easy to forget just how crazy things are.
from this within the 90 days that they've given the tech companies to comply with it, because it seems if you have an Android phone, this is going to be very, very difficult to enforce. Right, let's go to Mark, who's a new caller to LBC in Carlisle. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, what would you like to say?
Yeah, it just occurred to me while I've been listening all day to LBC regarding this subject, and it was just start to realise that nobody's actually mentioned the reason why the children need to be protected by this. And in that, I mean, there's the consequences of the paedophiles and the people having the explicit images of children. They're not even facing jail time. Obviously, there's the high-profile Hugh Edwards that's avoided jail completely, even having some of the most heinous photos on his phone or on his devices. But it seems like we're punishing the victim rather than the perpetrators of the reason that the children need to be protected. I just don't understand why there's no prison time. There's stiffer sentences for having child sexual images on any device or for any reason.
Well, there are stiff sentences for that sort of thing. I know somebody who was sent to prison for having actually most people would think were not sort of particularly serious photos. So, I mean, I don't understand why Hugh Edwards escaped jail, but that was the decision that the judge made. We weren't in court. It doesn't
seem an isolated case, though. I mean, Hugh Edwards is obviously the highest profile one, but in terms of what you see on social media, what brought it up was I was watching one of the police in 24 hours in custody things, and there was a guy with 1,200 images on his device, and there was the most serious level, and he got a 2-year suspended sentence, and he was like, really? Is that your punishment?
Yeah, well, I mean, any normal person is going to think that is outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, as a father, a teenage daughter who's on social media and things, it's obviously a worry, but yeah, it just seems odd that the children are the ones being punished. Obviously, children shouldn't be sharing explicit images to anybody or even taking them in the first place. But
would you be in favour of an outright ban?
On social media, not really, no, because it's not all children that are doing the images, or it's throwing everybody in with the...
No, but it's not all about sexualised images, is it? It's about bullying as well, all sorts of different
bullying,
things.
Yeah, I think that is that Pandora's box already open now, isn't it? There's no putting that back in the box now, I don't think.
True. OK, thank you very much, Mark. Jane says, foster mum here. Social media poses one of the biggest risks to adoption and fostering stability. So many children finding birth families online and messaging them, arranging to meet, etc. These are vulnerable children placed in the care system or adopted due to safeguarding issues, and social media can place them back in risky situations. The ripple effect is huge. Well, that's something I must admit I hadn't contemplated, but it sounds perfect common sense. Christopher says, Iain, you did not get a GCSE at school. I'm 54 and we did the first ever GCSEs. You maybe did CSE. That was below an O-level. I can assure you I did not. I think I did maths in 1978, and there was a pilot scheme, so they were pilot GCSEs for several years after that. So I'm sticking to my story there. Doesn't really matter. It's the equivalent of O-level, isn't it? Right, let's go to Amber, who is in Bourne in Lincolnshire. Hello, Amber.
Hello, Iain. I am very confused about all of this. I was just saying to your producer that it's an outright ban. Are they going to ban them from WhatsApp? Are they going to ban them from Discord? They're not going to be able to message on any of these systems at all?
Nope.
See, I just don't see how. My son's 16 and he's been through hell with social anxiety. He's been out of school he was out for about 2 years. And when he heard about the ban, he was like, "What?" He said, "I would have done away with myself if I hadn't have had my friends online, because that was the only way that he felt safe to communicate with people when he was going through what he was going through." And he's only on Discord. He doesn't do any of the social media sites. He's not interested in Facebook or Snapchat or anything like that. And it really was a lifeline for him. And
just explain. I know what Discord is, but just explain to people who are not familiar with it what it is.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't really know. It's where he chats to other gamers. So it's a gamers sort of forum, and they set up different servers and things like that so that they can all go in. It's kind of a way to meet like-minded people. If you're all playing the same game, someone sets up a chat and you all talk about about the game within the game. But he's made real friendships there, and to him they are real friendships. These are people that we've discussed going over to Ireland and meeting one of them, because he's had him as a friend for like 3 years. And it really was a lifeline for him. And I just think he's particularly anti the idea of banning it, because he's never done anything wrong, on it. He's used it very responsibly. But I've tried to explain to him that the biggest problem with social media, as I see it as a parent and as a teacher, is that it's the algorithms that they can manipulate on TikTok and YouTube, Facebook and Instagram and things like that actually give them information, this kind of misinformation that then forms their opinions. And we don't have any control over that. The tech companies do, but we don't, and that's why it's so dangerous to them. But I'm not sure that's gonna. I don't know that you're ever going to get away from that, because they've got the access. A bit like your previous caller said, you can't shut the box now. They've got access to the World Wide Web.
No, and what you said about your son sort of feeling that, well, if he hadn't got his little community on Discord when he was going through some tough times, what the possible consequences of that could have been. I mean, that is a really important thing, isn't it? Because that's the whole point of social media, whether it's, for most sites that I can think of, you do become part of a community. You're friends with people that maybe you've never met. There's, believe it or not, when I used to do the For the Many podcast, there was a For the Many superfans group, which still exists, and they've all become friends because of the podcast. Yeah. And you don't really, they're all over 16, but there will be equivalents of that for under 16s, and it would be a shame to get rid of that just because some people are spoiling it for the majority.
And it's not even some people, is it? It's not even the kids that we can hold responsible for it. We're punishing them, but actually it's the tech companies and the lack of legislation on what they are allowed to feed them when they know how old they are, or the lack of security in, proving how old they are. I mean, I don't understand why we don't have, I'm sure they must have the capabilities these days to be able to, you use your face to open your phone. Well, if your face isn't over 16, then you only get access to certain content and things like that, but of course the tech companies aren't going to offer any of that up, because they're raking it in from all these kids that they're sucking into the wheel with their advertising and their misinformation. But
I really wonder whether this is partly why the birth rate's falling, because people think, I don't want to bring a child into this world where they can be influenced by all of these tech companies, by pornographers and whatever. It's a big thing to bring a child into the world.
I completely agree, and I said to my son, I wouldn't, don't feel that you've got to go out and get married and have children. I said, I really wouldn't bring a child into this world right now. Yeah. It's scary. It is scary, and it's a difficult one, because like I say, you can't put it back in the box, but surely, there's a way of safeguarding these kids without punishing them. I mean, all the kids that I know, they use it for dance videos, and they communicate on WhatsApp between our music groups. For example, I teach music, the Rock School Bus groups, and they all talk on there. We put set lists on there. We share Spotify lists on there. They listen to music on there. There's so much good, like I say, that can come out of social media. But the tech companies could they must be able to do more. They must be. I'm not buying that.
Yeah, but I think you are right. But the problem is, it's not in their long-term financial interest to do more. But then you'd think the amount of money that they make, do they really need to make any more? Amber, great call. Thank you very much indeed. More of your calls to come on. Is the government doing enough when it comes to children's online safety? It's 9:48.
Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish.
Keir Starmer's latest announcement on social media seems to have pleased precisely nobody. So why is the government so reluctant to act? Plus, is Idris Elba right to say Britain's not ready for a black bond?
Ben Kentish at 10. Listen on our free Global Player app or the LBC app.
Selling your car can be super simple. If you
I mean, this is within living memory. And of course, those phones were literally just for phone. I don't think you could even text on them in those days. Anyway, Giuseppe continues. A basic phone capable of nothing more than calls and texts is more than enough to organise meetups and maintain friendships. We manage perfectly well without being isolated. Just as cars are restricted from young children on the grounds that they pose a risk to themselves and others, I see little meaningful difference when it comes to smartphones and tablets. James is in Surbiton. Hello, James.
Hello, Ian. I'm sometimes in Gravesend, but tonight I'm in Surbiton.
I was going to say, you've traded up tonight.
Oh, yeah, I've gone up to Leafy Surrey. Yes. I was going to talk, well, I've been listening to this debate that's going on. One of the things is I work in the law, as you might know, and the law doesn't keep up with advances in technology, okay? We have the Sexual Offences Act 2003. It's now 2026, and we haven't made many amendments to catch up with technology. Now, when it comes to the making of an indecent image, what we're looking at is Section 1 of the Protection of Children's Act 1978, and it's worthwhile your researcher having a look at that, because that concerns itself with the making and the distribution of such an image. I'm dealing with the matter now. I'm not going to go into it in great depth, but the person was found with indecent images on their phone. The image was created in 2019, and the person never bought the phone until 2023 from a second-hand vendor. And that's an interesting one, because if you know it's there, you're guilty of possession. And it was sent on a WhatsApp. And even though you might try and delete it from WhatsApp and think it's gone, it's saved into an album on your phone. So you can still get done.
But why would you have a second-hand phone that you hadn't, restored it to factory settings?
Well, I don't know what they do. I don't know what they do overseas, you see, because it was bought from a vendor overseas. So,
well, that's your first mistake.
Yeah, absolutely, mate, absolutely. So what we're trying to do now, we've got to speak to the vendor overseas to say, did this person really buy the phone off you in 2023? Because we got a receipt. Who sold it to you? And you can see how that's we go round and round and round and round.
I mean, that is a Kafkaesque nightmare, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is, because it could mean that I have a trip overseas to speak to the seller of that phone.
Which country?
Just say at the moment that the Iranians have tried to bomb it as well.
Okay, right. So it could be quite a dangerous trip for you.
Oh yeah, it could be. Yeah, but
well, James, if we never speak again, it's been a great pleasure having you on the programme.
And give my regards to your partner, okay, down in Pembury.
Okay.
All right.
Who you've never met, but that's very nice of you. Thank you very much. Matt is in Oxford. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Ian. Nice to speak to you.
Hi.
I was just wondering, because I don't understand, but I was just listening to it. And I was wondering, so if the criminality that surrounds the production and distribution, and it's by minors who, by definition, by law, are innocent or not culpable, and then it's accessed by an adult, where is that adult's criminal culpability?
Well, you say that the young
if the
adults...
culpability is in, I'm just wondering. I don't understand. So if the culpability lies in the coercion, of course, and so on, and then distributing amongst them. If minors have done that and an adult accesses it, to what extent is can he be held account properly?
Well, the simple answer is I have no idea.
Neither do I. Exactly. Yeah, because these are our children. It's so.
Well, there must be a legal position on this. I mean, if we weren't, we only got 4 minutes to go on the programme. Otherwise, I'd ask some lawyers to phone in and tell us the answer. But I'm not going to play amateur. I'm not going to play amateur lawyer.
No, me neither.
But it's an interesting point you raise, and also, of course, remember that the age for criminal responsibility is I'm looking at my colleagues here, 10, isn't it? I mean, under 10, you are considered to be not capable of committing a crime.
Are now criminals, exactly. So we're criminalising our kids, whilst at the same time suggesting we're doing it to safeguard them. I mean, I just don't understand the intersections of all these various Venn diagrams.
No, and the thing is, and maybe this is an awful thing to say, but there's part of me that doesn't even want to understand it because it's so far outside my area of expertise or knowledge. I don't feel I need to know that sort of thing. Unless I'm a lawyer, why would I need to?
I'd rather not concern myself with it. I agree with you. I think of the Artemis 2 and the wonderful shots of this Earth from space. I do not want to lose sight of the fact that if you pan the camera around this planet, most of us are getting on. Yeah. Most of it's beautiful. And we can forget that with the way that we focus on the misery. And it's heartbreaking. The trauma around that video from Henry, the trauma that we had to watch that in real time, intimate details, powerless to affect it.
Well, we didn't have to watch it.
No, but people watched. We didn't have to.
I mean,
I chose not to.
I watched it because I thought, well, I have to watch this because I need to have watched it for my job. Had I not needed to watch it for my job, I wouldn't have watched it.
I heard 3 seconds of it. I don't think so, mate. And the poor lad saying almost politely, "I've been stabbed," and that was enough. And we only get to see it after the fact, but we see it as if we were there, and we're powerless to affect it. And millions of people have been traumatized by it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Matt, thank you very much indeed for being our final caller. Adam says the social media ban for under-16s really needs the harshest of scrutiny, necessary as it is. When I was 14, one of my best friends from school had to move back to his home country, and social media plus gaming and Discord was the only reason we managed to maintain our friendship to this day. Social media can, if curated finely and with the utmost care, be beneficial to so many young people. I totally agree. It goes back to what we were talking about with, was it Amber, about the being able to create communities. And I mean, that is absolutely vital, isn't it? Let's finish off with this one from Anne, who says, please tell your caller that it is that Discord is social media and is one of the most unregulated. This is one of the biggest problems. Parents not educating themselves about what apps their children are using. Well, thanks for all of your calls and messages this evening. I'm back tomorrow from 7. If you missed any of this evening's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news, videos, opinion and podcasts. And there's a new episode of the Where Politics Meets History podcast out at 1 in the morning with me and Tessa Dunlop. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 1 on LBC, it's Richard Spur. But right now, he's back. It's Ben Kentish.
Iain, thank you very much indeed. Indeed. Hello there. A very, very good evening. Hope you're really well this Monday night. Ben Kentish with you on LBC. Coming up this hour, Keir Starmer announces that social media platforms will no longer be able to facilitate and profit from the sharing of naked images of children by other children. But he's going to give them 3 months to do